very good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the SIEW TechTable, organized by the Energy Market Authority of Singapore in partnership with Aramco. I am Hagios, and I will be your MC for today. The SIEW TechTable is designed to explore the new and innovative low-carbon technologies that will accelerate the energy transition. To join us in discussion for the day, you may scan the QR code on the screen to access the Q&A platform. And to kickstart today's program, it's my honor to invite on stage Chua Shun Long, the Assistant Chief Executive of the Sustainable Supply Division at Energy Market Authority, to deliver his welcome remarks. Shun Long, please.
Thank you very much. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon and a warm welcome to the third edition of the SIEW TechTable. This event seeks to explore emerging and nascent low-carbon technologies that can really help us to accelerate the clean energy transition. I'm pleased to be in the company of so many experts and bright minds in this field. And prior to this, I thought very hard about what I could share to best contribute to such a technical and very technological conversation. There's already a very substantive and wide-ranging technology agenda that we can all look forward to today. Things like carbon capture, utilization, and storage at a large scale, long-duration energy storage solutions, liquid cooling technology to enable AI, nuclear technologies including fusion, as well as sustainable aviation fuel and also geothermal. So I thought about it and I thought perhaps I should be contributing by sharing the policy context that will shape longer-term prospects for clean energy technologies within this region as a long-serving policy person and also a diplomat for this region. And to do that, I would like to unpack two relationships that are embedded in this year's SIEW theme, Connected and Sustainable Energy World, and then contextualize and bring that back to ASEAN. So first, the first relationship I want to talk about is that between technology and the clean energy transition. We all know this is very important, but how important is it globally and in ASEAN? So let's start off with some statistics at the global level. The IEA has estimated that technologies that are currently at the demonstration or prototype phase, these will contribute to over 35% of cumulative emissions reductions by 2050. So what this means is that from the sustainability perspective, future technologies, those that are not yet commercially deployed at scale today, these are going to account for over 1/3 of our effectiveness in achieving global emissions reduction outcomes, maybe even more. How about from the growth and investment perspective at the global level? The IEA estimates that global clean energy investments are going to reach $2 trillion this year. The CAGR, or cumulative annual growth rate, was 10%, compound annual growth rate, was 10% over the past 5 years, up from just a mere 2% in the previous 5-year period. And this has headroom to continue accelerating further, because the IEA estimates that in order for the nations to achieve our net zero emissions target by 2050, investments in clean energy need to grow at a CAGR of 15% to around $4.5 trillion annually by 2030. So there's a clear uptrend. Investments are accelerating and they are moving very fast from 2% to 10% and to 15% CAGR over the next 6 years. And a lot of this growth is going to correlate with the deployment of clean energy technologies at scale. Bringing this back to our region here in ASEAN, here, ASEAN is expected to become the world's 4th largest economy by 2030. Alongside their economic growth is rising energy demand. At the same time, over half of the ASEAN countries have already set targets to achieve net zero by 2050. So without deploying new technologies to change the way we produce, transmit, and consume energy, it will be impossible to reduce the carbon intensity of growth in ASEAN and meet rising energy demand while reducing our emissions to net zero. So perhaps more so in ASEAN than other parts of the world, technology will play a critical role in the clean energy transition. and basically technology is going to be very important. On the growth and investment front, ASEAN has also competitive advantages when it comes to participating in the emerging global supply chains for clean energy sectors. Indonesia and the Philippines, these are the world's two largest producers of nickel. Other Southeast Asian countries have substantial shares of thin, rare earth metals and aluminum-rich bauxite. Malaysia and Vietnam are the world's second and third largest manufacturers of solar panels. Thailand is a major hub for car manufacturing in our region and could also serve as a hub for producing cleaner energy vehicles. So from both the sustainability and growth perspectives, the policy choices are very clear for ASEAN countries and companies in this part of the world. We have to continue doubling down on energy technology, not only to meet decarbonization goals, but really to catalyze investments in green growth sectors. And perhaps even more so in ASEAN and then in other parts of the world, the demand for clean energy solutions and the prospects for green growth sectors will be favorable for years to come. The global statistics that I mentioned earlier from the IEA, I think a significant share of that could play out in the ASEAN region if we are able to organize ourselves, whether at a G2G level or even B2B. The second relationship that I want to unpack in the context of ASEAN is technology and energy interconnectivity. Similar to the first relationship, we all know this is important, but why so in the context of ASEAN? There are three structural features in ASEAN's energy landscape that will influence and shape energy policy and planning in our region for decades to come. First, the uneven distribution of demand and supply centers for renewable energy across ASEAN. For example, we have Laos with its enormous hydropower potential, estimated at 26 gigawatts. We also have Indonesia, which has potential for almost 3 terawatts of solar PV capacity, just solar alone. On the other hand, we have Singapore, where we are right now, a city-state which is alternative energy disadvantaged and will need to rely on imports of low-carbon energy to reduce our emissions. The same situation exists when we go down to the local level for every ASEAN country. There are some parts of a country which needs renewable energy, while some parts are rich in it, and we got to connect them. A second feature is that the types of renewable energy sources available are also uneven. No one country and no one single city has the perfect basket of renewable energy that can deliver a flat profile 24/7 across the entire country. In ASEAN, there will be a lot of reliance on solar. That is by far the largest source of renewable energy in our region, but solar is intermittent. We need to co-optimize and pair solar with other types of renewable energy from elsewhere, such as wind, or even pair solar with solar from other regions with a different irradiance profile. The third feature in the ASEAN landscape is our geography, and this requires very little elaboration. Essentially, we are a region of sprawling archipelagos and peninsulas with a lot of sea right in the middle. So the conclusion and the upshot to all these three key features of our region is that technologies to enable energy interconnectivity will be critical in the clean energy transition for ASEAN, and they will be in high demand. Whether it's in long-distance power cables, both overland and subsea, whether in terms of grid infrastructure upgrades to handle cross-border grid-to-grid and plant-to-grid connections, or even in terms of the large-scale and innovative solutions for backups that can manage the intermittency that renewable energy sources come with at a cost that is affordable. So some of what I've said on energy connectivity might be mature technology in some other regions, but they are still emerging and nascent in Southeast Asia from the perspective of deployment and adoption. We are only at the beginning of the S-curve here in ASEAN, and governments and industry will have to continue working very closely together to accelerate the adoption. Advanced energy technologies is a huge space, and I talked about how technologies that are not currently commercially deployed, those are going to be very important. But if you were to ask me what would be the most relevant here and now as well, and about to move at scale in ASEAN, I would suggest taking a close look at the constellation of technologies that would enable interconnections to happen. In conclusion, I would like to mention that as we navigate the complexities of the clean energy transition, conversation, collaboration, and partnerships still remain our most powerful tools. The discussions at today's SIEW TechTable are more important than ever. I would like to especially thank Aramco and our sponsors for their support, which has enabled us to create this unique platform to showcase cutting-edge technologies and to foster crucial collaborations and conversations. I would also like to thank our distinguished speakers for their sharing today, and I wish everybody an afternoon of fruitful discussions. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Shulong. We please invite you to take a seat. Next up, may we invite on stage Mohammed Al-Masrahi, Director of Global Analysis Aramco, for his opening remarks. Please join me in welcoming him on stage. Masrahi, please.
So good afternoon. It is my pleasure and honor to welcome you to SIEW 2024 TechTable. Following the great remarks by Mr. Chua, and in spirit about the theme of this year, SIEW, a connected and sustainable energy, I would love for us to come together in innovating new solutions that challenges the current convictions, the common sense, and allow us to connect the dots of the transition pathways, ones that's inclusive, diverse, and equitable. As Mr. Chua just highlighted earlier, the complexity of the energy transition is wide, crosses different cultures, nations, and you can see it globally, but more so here in ASEAN. And that was highlighted by our CEO, Aramco CEO, Mr. Nasser, on day one of SIEW. He highlighted that the transition progress has far been slower, far less equitable, and far more complicated than many expected. The world is not on track to meet affordability, transition speed, or the emissions reduction targets. So the world urgently needs a transition plan that works. And as we sit today for this tech roundtable, technology is a core pillar to that transition plan that Mr. Nasser highlighted, charted, and posited on day one. The world must accelerate the development of new energy sources and lower carbon technologies that can one day compete on price and performance and provide affordable clean energy to the masses and the rising middle incomes that actually going to come from ASEAN and be the driver for growth for not only the Asian region, but the globe in the coming decades. So I welcome you today to come together, explore those emerging and nascent low carbon technologies that will accelerate the energy transition. We need to remember that as we are on this journey of innovation together, we need to forge partnerships similar to this that we have with Energy Market Authority in establishing not only the narrative, but also look forward to how we can collaborate in new frontiers, new technologies, pragmatic solutions that will help the world achieve its transition goals. So thank you, everyone, and I look forward for an engaging, fruitful exchange today.
Thank you, Masrahi. May we invite you to remain on stage. Let us now invite on stage Landon Derrens, Senior Director, Morningstar Chair of the Global Energy Center at the Atlantic Council, to deliver his opening remarks. Landon will also be our moderator for the rest of the session. So without further ado, I will hand out the floor over to Landon. Landon, please.
Well, I'm going to join Mohammed here. Thank you for the opening remarks. Welcome and congratulations to SIEW, the Energy Market Authority, and presenting partner in Aramco, for what I think is, frankly, one of the most dynamic conversations of the week. You know, there's an element of thinking through how we achieve sustainability goals and net zero targets, and we often see backcasts to trying to force technologies into space. We should be comfortable with innovation, with technology, with the capacity of engineers and technologists out there to really create change. And this platform in the next several hours is an opportunity to have that dialogue. So I'm thrilled to be here. Again, Landon Derrens with the Atlantic Council out of Washington, D.C. And we're going to kick off the conversation before a broader discussion with a little bit of a fireside chat here with Mohammed on carbon capture and sequestration technology. So, Mohammed, really appreciated the opening remarks. I think it's interesting that as Aramco, we settled on thinking through what CCUS looks like in the context for the kingdom and for Aramco as a company. Why did we select CCS to be a topic?
So when we look at the global emissions, there are things that could be done with certain solutions easily available and maybe even make sense to certain energy systems. However, we do have a lot of sectors that's really hard to abate, especially for economies that want to be industrial, they want to develop their economy. Those sectors like the cement, material manufacturing, all of those does emit a lot of emissions, but it's really hard to replace or find affordable solutions. And carbon capture, and whether you utilize it or store it, represent that pathway. Because ultimately, if you really want to go and continue developing your economy, you still need to have an affordable mechanism to be able to continue producing, add value, while also achieving your goals for clean energy. So for the kingdom and for Saudi Aramco, what we found basically, CCUS has acted as an incredible lever that we're utilizing to achieve our goals. One example we had was basically the enhanced oil recovery and gas recovery in some of our fields, where actually we capture the CO2 and allow it to be used as a pressuring agent on those fields.
I'm getting you a new mic here. You were saying in terms of your effort on the two fields.
Yes. Now, we're also building a hub in Jebel. That hub aims to capture and sequester around 9 million ton in 2027. Out of that, Aramco will be capturing, sequestering 6 million. The 3 other million will be from other partners and other companies operating within Jebel, with the aim to achieve 14 million ton per annum of CO2 sequestration by the year 2035. The kingdom by then have a target of 44, so Aramco will be contributing around a third of the kingdom target. Maybe to put things in perspective, if you look at all the pipeline that's available for CCUS as of today, all the projects that have been announced or under construction, we're only talking about around 420 to 440 million ton of CO2 by the year 2035. So the kingdom is chartering ahead as a leader in this technology, because we believe if we manage to scale it and be able to bring the cost down, there is significant potential in being able to capture CO2 and be able to transform a lot of the hard to abate sectors into clean sectors.
So you brought up the concept of affordability, and affordability in this case can take on two facets to me, right? There's affordability of energy broadly, so energy access, making sure we continue to have economic growth, that the technology and energy that we're putting out onto the market continues to be more secure and affordable for society globally. There's also affordability of each technology. And so talk to me about the mechanics of where we stand today in terms of the affordability of CCUS and where we need to get it to and how we're going to do that so that it's widely adopted.
That's a good question. So as of today, there's 2 pathways of how you capture carbon. We're not going to talk right now on utilization storage, but let's focus on capturing the carbon. You either capture it from the point source or the point of emissions, like if you're talking about from a plant, or you capture from air, direct air capture. The latter, right now, is prohibitive. It's costly. We're talking about some of the plants we're seeing designed go between $800 to $900 per metric ton of CO2. The point source right now ranges between $150 to $200. Again, just to put in perspective, most of the carbon emission traded globally range between $5 to $7 in voluntary markets. On the European ETS, roughly less than $100 per metric ton. So from that point of view, it doesn't really make any economic sense for you to capture the carbon at a higher cost than just going and offsetting it. The thing is, if you look at other technologies that actually has developed over the last 2 decades, for instance, the electric vehicle battery pack. If you go back to 2005, 2007, a typical pack would cost you around $1,400 per kilowatt hour. As of today, it's averaging around $130 per kilowatt hour globally. For China, even less. That's almost 90% reduction in cost, which made the progression and the consumers adopting EVs much more palatable. It became much more affordable. If we can apply the same investment into carbon capture, we could achieve the similar cost reductions. And you just can imagine, especially for DAC, being able to capture the carbon from air directly and having that mechanism closer to the sequestration site is immense.
Right.
For instance, if you look at right now, the biggest chunk of cost, other than capturing the carbon, is transportation. That's because most of the carbon emission sources are far away from the geological site you're going to be using to sequester. So this is why we think carbon capture investment is much, much needed. As of last year, the world spent around $1.8 trillion on energy transition initiatives. Out of that was only $12 million spent on CCS, less than 1%. So if the world really want to achieve their emission targets, CCS is actually one of the most logical pathways. We just need to invest more into it, develop the policies that will allow the investment and de-risk for corporations. And hopefully with a cost reduction of 80–90%, we can unlock significant potential for CCUS.
No, that's exciting. There's interesting threads to pull on, both in terms of infrastructure and scaling. But before we go into those broader conversations, I didn't see it here at SIEW, but I've been to many events where Aramco has a presence, and you have Archie. So you have a command of global emissions and where the trade flows are going around the world. For those not familiar, this is a full life cycle breakdown of the emissions and the supply of I think it's almost any product, oil, gas, moving around the world. A really, really detailed command of it. And I think that reflects the similar detailed command that Aramco has of the geology in the kingdom. And I think you mentioned picking 2 sites and developing a hub. And so I want to talk about, why did you pick the 2 locations you did? Is it the point source aspect? Is it something else? And then what is the novelty of this hub concept, and why are we pursuing it?
So on the first question, you're absolutely right. When it comes to economics, when it comes to providing a platform that allows you to test, iterate, and be able to innovate even further, those 2 sites were actually made the most logical sense to us, because you're capturing the carbon close to it, so transportation cost is minimized, and the geological features of those 2 sites allowed us to sequester and be able to install mechanisms to avoid any emissions out of it. So that presented to us the perfect test bed to test the technology. Now on the latter, I think for the hub is basically can be your platform to prove the role of CCUS when it comes to capturing emissions from hard-to-abate sectors. We have significant industrial value parks in Jubail. Like I said, when you look at the CCUS, there's 3 elements for it. Capturing the carbon as one element, storing it into the geological site, that's another element, but the other one is transportation. For you to be able to scale and have one single pipeline moving from one site to another, you need to have a hub to be able to collect it, to be able to pressurize it and send it via that pipeline to the geological site. So that's why hubs are really important, because they should provide us that scalability. They provide us an ability to try and optimize and reduce the cost even further.
No, that's really interesting. I did want to come back to the idea of cost, so I appreciate you bringing that up. We talked a little bit about bringing the cost curve down through scaling and through these hubs. What about other policies that can incentivize CCUS and its broader adoption? I'm thinking about the inability to develop a carbon price globally has, obviously that would incentivize it. But you are seeing policy pop up around the world. I'm thinking about European carbon markets or the CBAM and other elements that are creating incentives, although not universal, for differentiated products. Is having CCUS a part of a broader thematic of moving towards showing you have the least carbon intensive barrel of oil? I mean, how should we be thinking about the other policy incentives and how they're enabling this space?
I think at the first point, policymakers need to start thinking a bit more pragmatic. One of the issues that we face when we talk about CCUS is basically there's a sense of rejection from policymakers when we talk about it. Be it because they don't understand it properly, be it because it comes with the connotation that it's not going to be able to achieve a fully clean outcome. But you just highlighted earlier when we talk about the life cycle analysis of a lot of the technologies, that same question actually pops up again. When you look at the life cycle of producing a battery and how you mine the lithium, how you get the cobalt and other minerals that goes into the batteries, you still end up with the same kind of question. So I think a better understanding of what does CCUS actually mean and what kind of potential would be the first point to alleviate and maybe disentangle this policy-making confusion. The other thing is, because the capital investment required to do CCUS is significant, and the lead time is long. You do need to have clarity, but also stability and certainty in the policy-making. You can't have subsidies or incentives that are only applicable for a couple of years because all these projects are designed to be on for 20, 30 years. So that's another element that needs to be tackled. But also, I think the other part would be the size of incentive. As I mentioned earlier, investment was only around $12 billion out of $1.8 trillion last year. And you ask yourself why. It's because government hasn't been able to produce a good package of incentive. So earlier I highlighted that the cost of a typical point source CCUS would be roughly around $150 to $200 per metric ton. The weighted average of the global CCUS incentive doesn't even reach $90. So you're talking about you're still losing half the cost. And CCUS as of now is really basically a cost center. It's not really a value creation. When we talk a lot about CCUS, we actually really mean CCS. The U part is not really fully unlocked yet. There's a lot of initiative. Even in Aramco, we're looking at how we can actually take the CO2 and create value out of it. I highlighted one earlier, which is basically using it as an agent to do enhanced oil recovery. But we're also exploring trying to inject the CO2 as a carbonate rock material that actually can help strengthen some of the geological structures. There's a lot of research that we're doing regarding using CO2 as an enhancer for cement to produce extra strong cement. But that is still far away from being a significant pillar for CCUS. Once you manage to unlock the value, and you need to do a lot of research in that field, you actually start turning this technology from being a cost center to a value creation. But until then, you need to have significant incentives that could incentivize investment, but also with certainty and a significant confidence that those incentives are there for long.
You know, implicit in Aramco helping sponsor SIEW and being a part of the dialogue here in Singapore this week is that these efforts also benefit from global partnership. And so I'm interested, we spend a little bit of time talking about the kingdom's and Aramco's specific role within the kingdom on bringing CCS to life. What does it mean for you to think about Aramco's global portfolio, operations from the United States to China, in terms of, and certainly here in Southeast Asia, in terms of making these technologies a reality?
That's a good question. Let me start with Archie, which you highlighted earlier. So one of the reasons why we started developing Archie was for us to understand exactly how much we're emitting through the whole value chain. And the reason for that is we understand that as the global community is heading or charting their way through the transition, we need to provide solutions that actually cater to their needs. And one of them was basically producing or at least selling emission-less crude oil. To achieve that, you need to understand how much we're emitting from the production, piping it to the terminals, putting it on board the ship, and delivering to the customer. And we've done that 3 times so far. And I'm glad to highlight that when we did it to the US, which is a very long journey, we've managed to make sure that our emissions doesn't exceed 3 kilograms of CO2 per barrel. And we are really proud of that achievement, and we're challenging ourselves even further to achieve we actually be able to provide and sell those solutions to our customers. Now, other than that, what we're doing is we're establishing research centers across the globe. In Singapore, in Beijing, Paris, Detroit, across the globe, where we are trying to develop market-specific solutions that cater to the need of our customers in these markets, but also takes into consideration the wider, let's say, sophisticated systems that they have. Mr. Chua earlier highlighted that in ASEAN, for instance, it is a diverse group of countries and nations with diverse cultures. They have a lot of similarities, but at the same time, they have a lot of areas where they actually are unique. And you can't really deliver one-size-fits-all solutions for all. You have to be able to figure out how to develop these specific solutions that cater to their needs. This is what Aramco is doing by establishing these global partnerships. We want to understand our partners better. We want to be able to cater to their needs and develop specific solutions that help them achieve the outcome they want.
So taking this back to the technology component, we are at the SIEW TechTable, and noting that you have these research centers. Can you just speak in the context of CCUS, whether it's point source or DUC, direct air capture technologies? Where do you see the technology maturity? And is it fair to say that Aramco is engaged across the full value chain on these technologies?
We are. We actually started from the point source. We're developing a lot of our technology to be able to optimize and decrease the cost of capturing. We're working with Siemens on piloting a direct air capture plant in Dhahran. Right now, it's around 12 tons. It should be operational by end of the year. But the aim is actually to scale it up to around 1,200 tons per year. It's part of our research development initiative to figure out how to scale and reduce the cost of that technology. But we're also developing mobility onboard capture on both light-duty vehicles and heavy-duty vehicles. We're trying to figure out what would be the optimal systems and mechanisms to try and capture the CO2 on board, and then be able to develop the system and the supply chain to take that CO2 from the car or vehicle into pipes and then delivering it into the sequestration point. So yes, indeed, we are investing heavily in research across the whole value chain.
Well, this is an incredible discussion. Mohammed, I really appreciate you taking the time to discuss CCUS technology with us. Are there any final thoughts you want to cover on the technology or on the financial aspects of where we're headed with this?
So basically, I think if I can just reiterate that when it comes to policy making, pragmatic, agnostic approach is usually what makes the most effective solutions. And when it comes to CCUS, this is where an area that we need to spend more time because it has the biggest potential to help us achieve our targets. I think I saw a study by McKinsey a couple of months ago where they're looking at the potential of CCUS, of it being able to capture around 4 to 6 gigatons of CO2 by the year 2050. Again, just to provide it in context, as of today, we're talking about 37 gigatons of CO2 emissions annually. So that huge significance just can come from one technology if we invest in it properly, if we put our efforts and come and collaborate in partnerships away from ideology.
That's great, Mohammed. Thank you so much. If you can bear with me, we're now going to shift to the next part of this conversation. I think it's fair to say that you partnered on the right tech table because we got a big crowd. For the crowd out here, we're going to change pace a little bit. And I think a lot of the success of this tech table depends on you. So what we're going to do for the next couple hours is go through multiple vignettes of technology. We heard it earlier. We already covered CCUS. We're going to talk batteries. We're going to talk SAF. We're going to talk geothermal, fusion. I mean, it's going to be an abundance of technology. These are all 20 minutes or so, 15, 20-minute discussions, a short presentation. I'll introduce somebody, and then we'll come back up, and I'll have a little bit of a dialogue. But you get to be a part of this. I have my handy sheet right here, so you get to ask questions. We'll eventually put up the marker on the scan on the screen again. Make sure you scan it. Make sure you ask questions. It makes it more fun. It makes it more engaging. If you all can join me in thanking Mohammed for a good discussion to kick us off. I really appreciate it. And for the next segment, I'm really excited to tackle lithium, beyond lithium, flow batteries as an effective long-duration energy storage alternative to net zero solutions. So I'm now going to ask for Dr. Avishek Kumar, co-founder and CEO of vFlow Tech, to join us on stage to present about this technology. Dr. Kumar? I'll see you in a second.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, EMA, for hosting TechTable, and thank you, Aramco, for sponsoring it. It's a good platform for us to show enabling technology. In the opening ceremony of SIEW, our Deputy Prime Minister Gan mentioned that it is a time where much more new innovative technology that are ready need to be implemented. The caveat is that the technology takes time, and it takes more time for adoption because the cost is high. Just now, Aramco was telling about it, that carbon capture is costly. And if you invest enough, the cost becomes down. I have personally seen it through my own career. I started my own research in solar when the cost of solar was about $4, and pivoted on a PhD and then working on half-cut technology, bringing down the cost of solar to about 17 cents per watt peak and making it the cheapest form of energy. We have all seen this with lithium. And now, lithium is the best storage technology. And and I'm amazed. Every year, I've been attending SIEW for the last 10 years. Every year I come back, we have made significant progress. Our Deputy Prime Minister, Mr. Gan, mentioned that in last 5 years, at Singapore, we have increased our solar capacity by 5 times, 1 gigawatt, and we are on track to be a 5 gigawatt. Solar is intermittent, and it is now the cheapest form of energy. If you want to achieve a net zero solution, this is how a solar curve looks like. I mean, you have surplus energy during the daytime, and you have your base load is running 24 hours. Are there technologies available today that can do a charge for 10 hours and then discharge for 15 to 20 hours to make a net zero switch? These are long-duration technologies. Particularly, we call it about 4 hours to 10 hours of charging, 10 hours to 15 hours of discharging. Can it be done in an effective way, in a cost-effective and a safe way? Today, we feel that it can be done. We at vFlow Tech have been working on this technology for the last 10 years, and 5 years of research where I've been working on technologies to make it more commercially viable. The reason is that you have a technology which is safe, but the efficiencies are low so that it does not make economical sense. Our research at NTU has been pioneering that innovation to bring down the efficiency so that you can store energy in a most cost-efficient way and release it in a cost and safer way. As you can see it, the challenge is that can we store energy during the available intermittent solar energy that is there, and can release it? Yes, the technology can do it. And that's what a solar graph shows. So our ambition is to power the world by renewable, which we call power by hour, and that I think is possible today. We have developed a product for different applications. Particularly, we see in the region there are products for running diesels for 8 to 10 hours, and a small microgrid application where you have a 250 kilowatt hour to 500 kilowatt hour in a container solution that can be used to power an island like Ubin, where we have deployed a technology 50 kilowatt load running 24 hours. is possible. We found out that the technology need to be scaled. The demerits of the technology was that energy density was lower than lithium-ion technologies. The advantage is that you can scale energy density vertically using tanks. So we innovated, and we thank JTC, EMA, and Enterprise Singapore to giving an opportunity to design a new technology that can scale up. We deployed a second design, which is scalable. The advantage is that in the same land area, from a 2 megawatt hour, you can increase to 20 megawatt hour. And that's what our product is, increasing the energy density by deploying vertically. For a 800 megawatt hour, our simulation says if you are deploying a 100 megawatt, 800 megawatt hour lithium-ion batteries, a similar capacity, the area, on a ground area of ESS, it will require the similar area. The most fundamental on energy storage technologies are that how sustainable it is, what is the carbon footprint. The other advantage of particularly vanadium redox flow technology is that it is 99.2% recyclable. The electrolyte, which is made up of vanadium, has infinite lifetime, is easily reused, and the rest part, like plastic, iron, equipments, are all recyclable. So from a recyclability and reusability perspective, technology is highly sustainable. We are also exploring use of vanadium from petroleum waste. We found out that lower quality crude has heavy metals as impurities. And you can get about 5 to 10% of vanadium, which makes it highly sustainable, also cost effective, making it highly ready for scalability. Well, as we talk about it, we have deployed and sold use cases. We are now talking about decarbonizing steel industry. We are having discussion with many steel manufacturers, particularly with CBAM coming in, there is a need for decarbonizing steel. One simple way is that your electric arc furnace, like 200 megawatt load running 24 hours, can be done. We done a simulation with a 1 gigawatt solar in the Middle East, where we are looking into scalable structure. This is a 4 megawatt, 40 megawatt hour structure, and we have recently executed an MOU with a tank storage company, Advario, to reuse the tank, again a sustainability perspective. And we are doing this on Jurong Island to make a 4 megawatt, 40 megawatt hour. The same pilot we are discussing with a steel manufacturer whose problem is 200 megawatt load running 24 hours. In 10 hours is because you charge the batteries in 10 hours and then discharges. So do it 65 times, you have 260 megawatt, 2.6 gigawatt hour capacity. And on a simulation that we are doing for the material supply chain availability, the cost of storing energy is about 7 cents. And your project IRR is about 12%. So the technology is viable. We need people to adopt it because the technology is not bankable. That's why we need a collaboration. And I think people in the room will address. So once we have been able to demonstrate at gigawatt hour, I think it's ready. Another advantage of this technology is as you can store liquid, it can change shape. And for Middle East, not a problem because space is there. But for a country like Singapore, where we are concerned about strength, we are also exploring to do it underground. And when you do it, the area required is 50%. And that's what is an advantage. So you can make it in a building because it's liquid, very hard to catch fire. And you can build a stack on top of it. And that makes it highly scalable from a design perspective, integrated in building. And we are also thankful for EMA that we are exploring an underground storage with this technology. Thank you with this.
Dr. Kumar, you already have the idea. Let's go ahead and grab a seat. If we could put the code for questions, let's get those up there as well. I'm going to kick off the conversation with a question that I think resonates in a lot of policy circles, which is supply chains. You know, we obviously are talking about beyond lithium, but when we think about batteries, there's a lot of capital being spent in the United States, the Inflation Reduction Act, on bringing battery manufacturing back to shore because of supply chain concerns. Can you talk about the impact of your technology and what that means for supply chains?
That's a very good question. I mean, for any technology to be viable, you need to have a mature supply chain, and that has happened in the past. For our case, the good thing is about it that from a design engineering perspective, we use a lot of plastic, we use iron and steel, so that's easily available in the ecosystem. The other part is vanadium. Now, vanadium is 15th most abundant element on Earth, but the use case was only using hardening steel. So there are mines, but people are not mining it. So with the interest in batteries, there are mines coming up in Australia, in South Africa. Beyond that, as I mentioned, it is always worth to localize the source of vanadium, and that's why the petroleum waste angle, and in Middle East, there's a lot of refineries. We have to find out low-cost crude. In India, we are tying with few large corporates who has refineries, and we have seen they're good source. So you need to optimize it. Somebody has to do it, and that's why, I mean, with this Inflation Reduction Act, you get innovative in developing supply chain. Not only supply chain, it's about also bringing the quality. It takes time, and that's why we are working in the direction.
Speaking of quality, John Lim asked a question here. You did bring this up in your conversation, but I want to build on it. Traditional lithium-ion batteries are known to degrade over time with use. There was a small subcomponent in your presentation about vanadium redox flow batteries addressing this issue. Can you give a little bit more information on that?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, lithium-ion is a phenomenal technology, and what China has done it is amazing. I mean, bringing it cheaper. But inherently, the physics, where the electron moves from cathode to anode, over the time, it's not 100% recyclable, so the performance degrades. Things become more worse when you make it in a pack, because then charging, discharging are not different, and the weakest link fail. On a flow battery technology, because it's a redox reaction, electron changes state, V2 changes to V3, you can do it infinite number of times. So from a performance perspective, and it's a closed loop system, there is no degradation that we have seen, and we can ensure that if I'm giving 100 megawatt hour today, the energy will be delivered after 25 years. That's from the physics perspective. From a design and engineering perspective, there is a stack, there is a membrane, and over the last 10 years, we have done design innovation process that enables a longer life of a membrane. We offer a warranty of about 10,000 cycles, which is about 27 years. So performance warranty for 25 years, we assure it. And from a simple physics perspective of redox flow batteries, the performance can be warranted.
Another major theme that we see in these tech conversations typically deals with bankability. You know, we did talk a little bit about the technology and the maturity not being yet bankable, but building towards it. What is it going to take to really make this technology move to market on a commercial scale?
I mean, that's a very, very good question, and I'm also trying to find out. We have seen it in solar. In stages, solar was not a bankable technology. Bank was not funding it. At that time, innovative financing from debt came into picture, where there was a bridge gap financing till the system is installed, and then the bank came up. That was one way to solve it. We would need, we are talking about it wholly. There is a need for blended financing. We need a government to come with the blending financing, give that cushion to a technology developer that demonstrated at a scale of 100 megawatt hour, 200 megawatt hour, finance it till the bank sees it, that the money is coming, it's performing, and then the bank can commit. So there is a mix of it, which is adoption. Pilot product, I mean, in the US, you will see that the government is coming up. In the China, you see the government takes the project out. So there is a mix. You need a larger projects, which corporate and government need to come up with it. That's a, I mean, if you're deploying gigawatt hour battery, and I think there's no risk. 900 megawatt hour can be established technology, 100 megawatt hour a new technology. You blend it on the risk there, and there should be a mandate. Then we should have an innovative venture debt to balance it with a blended finance. I think if these two things comes together, it's much easier to scale the technology.
So we're looking at a public-private partnership to help get this moving forward. You know, I'm thinking about the proliferation of solar resources in this region in particular. How much support are you getting from governments where they have challenges with intermittency and they're trying to tackle this? Do you see a different regulatory regime emanating from, say, India or Southeast Asia in general? Or are you looking to leaders in terms of the policy frameworks to support these technologies coming from the United States, for example, with the Inflation Reduction Act?
But that's, again, a very good question. From a support perspective, I mean, we are blessed. We are in Singapore. We have, I mean, and you mentioned, our Deputy Prime Minister also mentioned that there was a support for deployment of solar. Now we are looking at energy storage. There is a 200 megawatt hour on Jurong Island for different applications. We have been privileged for certain demonstrations. So that's from a demonstration perspective, we are getting some visibility. In terms of regulatories, I don't see there is an acceptance of technology. Particularly, I can quote you in India, if you do a lithium-ion battery technology, the GST rates are 5%. A technology like flow battery, the GST rate is 28%, which is very high. I mean, and that need a bit of lobbying. Here it's straightforward, GST, but there are these regulations in each state, and because the technology is new, there is not been much of a lobbying of new technology. So these are a challenge of a startup or a new technology to not only build the technology, but also educate. And that's why a forum like TechTable is quite useful.
Well, it's taking, clearly you have limited resources and limited time, so you have to be able to prioritize. Do you think in general that you're going to be pursuing specific markets right now as a strategy, or are you looking for opportunities to engage a wide, diverse audience because you're still looking for exactly who your champion's going to be?
We are blessed. I mean, our inbound inquiries are huge because people need energy storage. It's just that they are not very sure on which technology is how, but there is a need for energy storage that you can't deny it. We are very focused in this region, particularly, I mean, energy import. We see that energy storage requirement is a key block, and in that we are trying to find out a niche for long duration. India is, need to expand manufacturing, so we have a manufacturing setup in India. India also is adopting energy storage technology. Australia is again in the region for importance for us. We have found out Middle East because there are large steel manufacturers, cement manufacturer who has a mandate to go net zero. These are primary markets. US is far. We would love to go there because of multiple incentive. But idea is to grow in this market and then expand.
Your first slide was a focus on the benefits of storing the intermittent energy coming from solar in particular. And so I think the appreciation for what battery technology can do for enhancing reliability of renewables is well known. But can you expand? Do you see other applications on where the benefits of battery energy storage systems really can proliferate throughout our energy system?
There are key three markets. I mean, renewable energy developers definitely, because it stabilizes it, it gives you command. It gives you, I mean, so the advantage of long duration is that it can do the peak shifting. It can also participate in other factors. What we are seeing is key demands increasing in utilities. I am in discussion with a leading utility in India. The problem with utility is that because now there is huge amount of solar deployment, they were also reliant on hydro. So at times of day, they have very surplus power. People are not using it, so that's wastage. And then where they don't have power, the grid operator go to exchange and buy, which changes, and there is also a lot of stress in that particular aspect. When we told them that we can do 10 hours of energy storage, they were excited about it. We're exploring on 10 primary substations to do a 10 megawatt, 100 megawatt hour and 10 substation, looking at managing energy at different substation. And if there is shortage, these batteries will provide energy to them. So that will be one of world first or 10-hour battery backup on utilities to balance the grid. So that's a grid part. And we are also seeing an extreme demand from steel manufacturer because of they are selling, most steel manufacturers are selling steels to Europe, where they need to go net zero, and one of the important component is hydrogen. Second important component is their electric arc furnace running on clean power, where there's a requirement of batteries.
So another contribution from the audience here, and this one's a little bit more technical, so I'm going to go ahead and just read it. What's the efficiency from charge to discharge, and what is the response time on both charging and discharging sides? I.e., can it respond to quick changes in intermittent power generation, and likewise respond instantaneously to demand like a peaker plant?
So our DC efficiency, I mean, depending upon, because I'm saying solar, round trip is about 85. Then there are inverters, I mean, including all the auxiliary losses, we are looking at 75+% round trip RT end to end. Yes, it can respond to a peaker plant. The response time is less than 50 to 100 milliseconds, and that is the response time of the PCS. It's not limited by the batteries.
And one more question here from the audience. So from BG, what are the policy designs that would facilitate flow batteries and BESS deployment? Any examples of existing success stories?
I'm also finding those policies. The problem is that policymakers often look at the available resources on Google, and this is most available on internet. So the tenders are designed mostly for short duration, 1 hour, 2 hours. Recently, India GUVNL has put up a tender for 1.2 gigawatt hour, 8 hours of battery backup. It would be helpful if there is a specification that niche technology can be deployed, because I mean, you know, the EV demands are up and down, and there's supply chain issues in China. So they put lithium-ion batteries everywhere, and there are ways to do it. Not the most efficient way, and people realize it. So it should not be the cost-centric tenders, policy-wise. For a new technology, there should be some leverage of cost. Cost come down when the adoption increase. So this would be helpful. There should be incentive to deploy mixed technology. And again, many panelists have been talking about one shoe does not fit all. So there has to be different technology that has to come. And there has to be policy incentive to enhance a technology player like us to bid. And then once we scale it up, prove it up, then we are open to compete with any technology.
So vFlow Tech has been a feature of SIEW. I think we saw you here last year as well, and I imagine we'll see you again next year as this technology matures. Just thinking year on year, if there's one key takeaway that you want to see within the tech table and have this audience really have an appreciation for, what's the key takeaway on your technology that you want this community to prioritize as we move forward and hopefully see the success and scalability of your product in the coming year?
Thank you. Again, a very good point. TechTable already provides a good platform for us to enable the stakeholders, and I think most of the stakeholders. We would want the policymakers to be, we have a deputy CEO of EMA talking about policies. We want how this policy can be integrated, as you raised the right point. We want the audience to come back with use cases and application, and there should be a platform where new technology use case can be discussed. If these things happens while we build technology is easier, because at this point of time, our job becomes more difficult. I have to develop use case, I have to develop technology, develop supply chain, develop regulatory, and put together with limited resources is a difficult job.
Well, you're working in a fascinating space, and we really appreciate you taking the time, Dr. Kumar, to come down and talk about your flow battery systems. So thank you very much for joining the audience. And we're going to move on to our next vignette here. So it's an exciting topic, and we're looking forward to bringing on Luca Oluso and Jose Castaneda. Give me 1 second. We'll walk off together to have a conversation around liquid cooling technology and how it's ready to enable the acceleration of AI. So, Dr. Kumar, thank you very much. Luca and Jose, really excited to have you here.
Thank you.
Of course.
I don't know if I have to talk on this mic. This one is fine. Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Luca Melluso. I'm the VP of Customer Success within AirTrunk. I'm here with my colleague, Jose Castaneda, and to talk a little bit about what we're doing in the data center space and our progress in liquid cooling technology. For those that are actually familiar with AirTrunk, this was your slide. We've been around since 2015. That's when our CEO and founder, Robin Kuda, saw a shift in the data center market, moving from the traditional, co-location, retail sort of commercial model to, essentially the advent of the cloud. Asia, just like in other instances, lags a little bit behind. That move was already in place in the US and in Europe, and he saw the wave coming into Asia. So founded in 2015, we had our first facility sitting 130 megawatt that opened up its doors in 2017. Since then, we have expanded across 5 regions, 7 cities, 11 facilities, and we have about 1.4 gigawatt of capacity in our portfolio. We don't have a lot of customers, but the customers that we have are the largest consumers of data. So these are the large cloud provider and tier 2 tech companies. We are essentially building the core and shell foundations for the digital infrastructure. If you look at the demand, recent forecasts see the cloud spending reaching $1 trillion, 1 trillion Aussie dollars in 2025. This growth has been supercharged by the latest innovation in AI. And all this is opening up the doors to a lot of challenges and opportunities, in particular around energy transition. Is that?
Thank you, Luca. I'm Jose Castaneda, VP of Innovation and Intelligence at AirTrunk. And I think Luca has introduced the data center infrastructure, how it plays a big game into the digital business. The new component that we are seeing now is the rise of AI capacity across the globe. This is an additional capacity that is coming already to our markets, and it will present a energy consumption challenge. And making sustainable data centers will help the communities through balancing innovation and environmental stewardship. So what we see is this challenge needs collaboration across the different stakeholders to develop. To develop energy efficient net zero data centers that support the digital economy. So the opportunities for the industry in this aggregated capacity is how we power the energy to the cloud and to the AI infrastructure. One of the benefits of hyperscale computing and AI is that it is much more efficient than having our servers into our premises or offices. The advantage is around 35% more efficiency. So by putting our data into hyperscale platforms, we are actually contributing to reduce our energy demand. Data centers are also a very large and stable load. That presents opportunities for balancing the grid and helping the grids to have that starting base load. And it also helps to provide certainty for renewable investments. We can help by underwriting 15 to 20-year investments, which can help the renewable and storage projects to actually have that assurance that the projects are long-term. So what are we doing? We are contributing, AirTrunk is contributing through our energy efficiency strategies, our renewable energy purchase and strategies, and through innovation. On the energy efficiency, we are best of class PUE across the industry in APAC. We have a 1.32 PUE across our portfolio. And for those that don't understand the term PUE, PUE is power usage efficiency. This is how we data center providers measure our efficiency. And it's basically the ratio between the energy consumed by the IT servers and the total energy consumed. And most of that energy losses come from the cooling processes and some minor losses on the electrical systems. So by improving our PUE, we are helping the decarbonization path, and we are accelerating that energy transition. But that's probably not enough, and that's why we are introducing today one of our innovations. But before I go into the liquid cooling, I want to emphasize how AirTrunk also plays a big role into renewable energy and energy storage. We have a net zero target for 2030 of net zero on scopes 1 and 2, and we aim to match 100% of our electricity consumption with renewable energy. Our customers also are the biggest investors in renewables across the world, and we help our customers to achieve their goals. Like, for example, we announced collaboration with Microsoft and CLP for a renewable deal in Hong Kong. We have long-term PPA for Google in Australia, and a renewable virtual PPA in Malaysia with IB Vogt. And we are very active exploring battery energy storage system, not only on the grid scale, but also looking at adopting battery energy storage system at our or next to our data centers, which means that we can help not only the 24/7 clean energy approach, but also we can help the power grids to become more stable. So as I said, the innovation is one of our pillars to help the energy transition. Liquid cooling is a technology that rather than cooling the servers with air streams like your laptop or your computer at home, we cool the servers through liquids or fluids running through the chips. This technology could be direct to chip or immersion cooling, but the principle is the same. A closed circuit water or liquid cooling loop runs around the chips. The benefits of the technology are the superior heat dissipation. Running water instead of air is physically much more efficient. The energy efficiency comes not only from that higher heat dissipation, but also the fact that those fluids run at higher temperatures than the air, which allows us to run our heat rejection systems more efficiently and most of the times not requiring refrigeration systems. So just rejecting the heat to the atmosphere, and even that includes possibilities to reuse the heat from that process. The liquid cooling also helps with the densification of data centers, not just on the building, but on the servers. The GPUs that are used for AI run much more efficiently if they are close to each other, which means that there's more heat that needs to be dissipated in less space, and having liquid cooling technologies help us to achieve those additional challenges. We run more efficiently. We reduce the hotspots into our customer servers, and we help also on the noise reduction within the data center. So I think this is a very brief introduction. We have launched today a liquid cooling white paper, and there will be more. That you can find more information in our website on that liquid cooling white paper. So I think we are ready for questions.
I thought for a second I was going to have to stand behind you both, but we found a magical third seat, so we can have a good conversation here. Luca, Jose, thank you so much for that discussion. It is clearly one of the most relevant discussions I'm seeing globally, whether I'm in Brussels, Washington, D.C., here in Singapore. The idea of the urgency around AI, around supercomputing, and obviously how data centers are changing the dynamics of energy demand and economies that we've seen relatively flat electricity expectations for a long time, and we're seeing that grow now. The idea of having cooling systems, liquid cooling systems, is something that's gaining steam in terms of hearing about it, but we're not often understanding the technology. So just to break it down a little bit more, you talked about this being a water-based closed-loop system. Is it always going to be water? Are there other technologies that we're playing with in terms of what liquids we're using to cool? Like, how does it operationalize, and how important is the source in terms of where the water's coming from? I'm thinking about Phoenix, Arizona. You know, back in the States, we're building out some of these facilities in locations that are a little bit scarce in resources.
It's a good question, because there is a little bit of confusion that is probably our fault as an industry. When we talk about liquid cooling, there's some people think that we are using a lot of water. Not necessarily. What we say is that the fluid around the chip is a liquid, it's a fluid, but it's typically in a closed loop. So the heat rejection is what may or may not consume water, but the actual liquid cooling system is a very small quantity of liquid. But back to your first question of the different types of liquids that can be used and are used in the industry. So it varies. In direct-to-chip technologies is basically the two liquids that are currently being used are deionized water or reverse osmosis water and polypropylene glycol water. So 25% propylene glycol and water. But this is closed circuits. On immersion cooling systems, we see these oils that they have to be dielectric, so the technology is immersing servers into dielectric oil, and there is a lot of options there for new oils being developed for this technology.
So clearly the potential for innovation and technology change in this space over time with the coolants to begin with. There's a theory here that when we find these efficiencies, we tend to use the efficiency gains. And so just thinking about the scalability of the technology, are there any limitations? Can you keep pace with the growing demand? Because there's an expectation and certainly a perceived appetite that's transforming how energy policy has been engaged for decades. So do you see this technology having any limitations in keeping up with a really aggressive scalability aspect of AI and data centers?
I think absolutely. The biggest challenge that we have ahead of us is how we actually power up these services and solutions. I don't know if this is not.
You're on now.
Okay. So the technology itself, I think liquid cooling in terms of technology has been in the making for many, many years, but it's only been recent years with, for example, the NVIDIA progress in terms of GPU and applications that really force that sort of solution onto a lot of customers and then come to us to actually host these services. So the biggest challenge that we see over the next 3, 4, 5 years is essentially seeing how are we going to accommodate these data centers that are growing in scale and getting to the point where we are essentially using the same amount of power as small cities. If you look at the shift between cloud computing and AI, that can add opportunities but also challenges. Cloud computing is designed so that the workload needs to kind of be close to where the users are. AI has a slightly different sort of approach where you're essentially training a model, and this training model can be delocalized somewhere else, perhaps where you can find a lot of land and a lot of power. Ideally, both of them quite cheap. And then there's, once the model has been trained, then it's into production, there's actually an appetite or a desire for that to be closer to where the users are. So in terms of technology, it's progressing very, very fast. And there's also, just like we've seen with the introduction of new technologies like the iPhone or the iPads. I mean, I remember when I bought the first iPads, there were probably like 4 apps that you could download from the app stores, right? But there's going to be a new array of services and solutions that are going to become available, requiring even more computational power. And the way this is exploding is, the hockey stick sort of shape. So for us, will be a continuous progress on innovation, seeing how we can put very little overheads on the amount of power that we need to actually use those services. And then the next step is how we, play an active part in decarbonizing the footprint that we're actually generating. So how we offset our carbon footprint. Clearly, the easiest way of, decarbonizing is actually not using power. So for us, a big focus is on that number that Jose mentioned, the PUE, where we're essentially saying, if to run my services I need 1 kilowatt, if I reduce that 1 kilowatt and I still keep my services up and running, then that's where the energy boost comes. The only other alternative is that we stop using technology, but that's not an option.
Yeah, and I think the important part is that we are focusing on renewables and energy storage to power up and all that new capacity.
Sure.
And the existing capacity.
There's a question here that's just technical. I think it builds on the conversation we're just having, which is how much energy savings versus traditional methods are we actually seeing on a percentage basis? And is liquid cooling is prevalent in the industry now? So what percentage of savings are we seeing versus air cooling? And then also maybe the percentage in terms of market penetration at this point.
So we foresee that in the next years, between 30 and 60% of the capacity will be liquid cooled. and the average savings will be around 30%. The savings is not only the technology, it's what is around the use of the technology, the choice of heat rejection, the choice of sustainable water sources to run optimal cooling systems. So I think it's a step change in the industry that we are facing. The AI is changing our lives. AI is also changing the data center provider lives, because it's that moment, very exciting moment of change and new technologies and innovating to achieve the best outcome.
Even a year ago, we weren't thinking about having AI in the panel discussion necessarily, right? It's amazing what's happening, how rapid it's occurring. You know, part of the beauty of tech tables is taking on the challenges of technology. And Jim Young points out that he perceives leakage of cooling liquids will be a potential problem. I won't call it the big problem. How do we block it effectively? So, you know, leakage of cooling liquids being an issue for the industry, how do we address that?
I would say that there's a lot of people in the data center space that are probably losing their sleep around these issues. I mean, data center haven't really evolved very much for their first 50 years. I think it's over the past maybe 10 there has been like a major shift. But if you've ever been in a data center, you usually see a sign outside the door that says, no drinks inside. And now we're just saying, not only we're going to bring the drinks, but we're going to bring it in through really, really large pipes. Of course, it's not a matter of what I don't really want to. They will have to like go down that path. We're looking at, of course, ways of minimizing, you know, potential risks. One is running pipes under the raised floor. One is going to overhead. But we spend a significant amount of time just, you know, designing the joints or how these pipes run or how we design these valves. Because at the end of the day, we provide services with very stringent SLAs. And the ownership on, you know, reducing operational risk really sits on us. So that's, we have probably a good 15, 20 engineers just within AirTrunk, and 80% of their time is spent on designing this next generation of cooling distribution systems to really making sure that, you know, these kind of issues are addressed and they don't become a problem.
So we're almost at time, but I can't resist but to ask one more question because I think it's actually relatively humorous. You know, you're empowering this aspect of AI and large language models in terms of the contribution that AI can bring to society, to the world. Is it possible that the AI itself may find some efficiencies for your technology at some point?
That's already a reality. We have systems that we have AI looking at our cooling systems for real-time optimization. We are looking at AI to help us in other aspects of our design and development. So it's not future. It's helping us to be a better industry, and hopefully the AI will help a lot of other industries and other big challenges in the world to actually improve and get better.
A full circle of life there. We're moving forward, AI and the liquid cooling. Gentlemen, it was great to have you with us today. A really interesting conversation and relevant to current events. I mean, this is constantly a conversation, I think, at the dinner table, at least in policy circles. So thank you very much for joining us, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you. Great. Oh, please. Well, it's my pleasure now to move on to the next vignette here, the next segment. A really awesome topic on fusion energy, the solutions at scale of the climate problem. Where is fusion and how are we going to get there? It's my pleasure to introduce Jennifer Ganton, Chief Global Affairs Officer at Commonwealth Fusion Systems. Jennifer, the floor is yours.
Thanks so much. Okay, well, I first want to thank the EMA for the opportunity to be here today and talk about fusion energy. I think we've heard over the last 2-3 days, if you've been here, the magnitude of the problem that we're facing with growing energy demand while solving for the climate change issue is daunting. It's a significant amount of solutions that have to come into play. And we think fusion energy is probably one of the most ideal solutions for this scale of the problem that we're facing in the world today. So I usually start these with explaining what fusion energy is. There's a lot of folks who are not familiar with fusion energy, and where the state of the industry is today. So I'll just start with like, what is fusion energy? Fusion energy is building a machine that can fuse together two light hydrogen isotopes. And when you cause that fusion reaction to happen, you get helium as a byproduct, and then you also create a neutron that goes out into the capture system. But you generate a tremendous amount of energy through this reaction. It's something on the order of the magnitude of, if you want to compare it to a fossil fuel, 100 million times the reaction, the chemical reaction per reaction of a fossil fuel when you're doing it in a fusion machine. So it's a process that's known. We've been working on fusion for many decades. It's actually the process that happens in the stars and the sun. It is the ultimate form of energy that the universe decided on a long time ago with the sun. But now we're trying to build machines that can actually make a commercial version of fusion energy into the power grids. So I'll go through the attributes of fusion energy, which I think is an important thing, because it'll get to a little bit of why we think this is such a big solution for the size of the problem we have. It's clean. As I mentioned, I talked about the reaction that happens. It's a zero emissions power solution. It creates heat, essentially, so you can use it to turn a turbine and create electricity into the grid, or you can actually use the industrial heat that comes out of the machine. It's safe. We're at the opposite end of the periodic table than fission reactions. So there's a couple things that are inherent to fusion that make it very different. There is no chain reaction that can happen in the fusion machine the way that can happen in fission. If something were to happen and the machine stopped operating, the smallest puff of air gets into the machine while the reaction is happening would just cause the reaction to stop happening. You're trying to create the sun on Earth. It's really hard. And so it's a difficult problem, and when the reaction stops happening, there is no consequence to that of a chain reaction that you would see in the fission plants. We also don't use special nuclear materials like uranium and plutonium as our fuels. The hydrogen isotopes, for example, that we're using at Commonwealth Fusion Systems are deuterium and tritium. Deuterium comes from seawater, and tritium is currently a byproduct of the fission industry. But we are designing a machine that will be able to create our own tritium within the machine as well. And we also don't have long-lived waste, high-level waste that you see from a fission machine. So from a safety perspective, there are neutrons, so there's byproducts materials that will come from the machine that will be radioactive, but these are more on the lines of decades to decay as opposed to hundreds of thousands of years. So big difference in being on the other end of the periodic table for this reaction. It's also on demand. One of the problems I think we hear about with some of the solutions that are here are, can we couple renewables with a storage? And what are the various things we have to do? The beauty of fusion is, as we build these machines, it will be a firm baseload power. It will operate, you could take a coal plant that exists today, and you could shut that coal plant down, and you could put a fusion plant there, and it could become the firm baseload power that goes into the electric grid. And you'll see on the diagram that I have in the slide, we can plug into the grid as it is today. And so that's one of the beauties of this is we can use and leverage existing infrastructure that is there today, but there's also opportunities down the road for being behind the meter and being directly associated with large consumers of energy that want to have clean energy. And the other thing with the fusion machine, because of the nature I explained of the technology, is you can actually turn it on and off. You don't have to deal with some of the concerns you have with the fission industry, and so it can also be dispatchable if you need it. It can serve both markets. It's scalable, and so you can site it anywhere. It doesn't rely on the wind blowing or the sun shining or a pipeline or a rail line to bring product. When you build a fusion plant, you can put all of the fuel needed for the lifetime of that plant in a truck and drive it up to the first day of the plant operation and store it on site, and it will operate that plant for the next few decades. So this really opens up the ability to put these closer to demand centers and where they need to be. And lastly, I'll talk about secure. And this has come up a little bit at the conference, not as much around the innovation piece, but also national security. And so the fuels that I mentioned, you're no longer reliant on commodity price swings, commodities being cut off, those type of things. So we view that from a fusion perspective, there's a tremendous amount of security built in that's a benefit to this technology as well. So there's a growing fusion industry, which people may not be aware of. There's over 40 private fusion industry companies. And we are one of those. We're the largest of those 40. We were spun out of MIT in 2018, so most of those companies are fairly new, and they use a variety of different technologies. But of all of those companies, there's about 80% of them that have said they are anticipating putting electricity into the grid in the 2030s. That's a time frame most people aren't aware of where commercial fusion is today. And so for CFS, our company, we were spun out in 2018. Our timeline is and I'll just go through really quick, and then I'm going to show you some pictures, but we de-risked our core technology. So we're using a design called a tokamak. It's a traditional design for a fusion machine. There's been 150 tokamaks built in the world. And so we know how to make fusion out of these tokamaks. The problem is we've never been able to do more power out than in. You have to actually be able to generate quite a bit more power out to have a model that could be a power plant. So we're designing a machine that's a tokamak, and we're going to be deploying our first demonstration plant for that. It's called Spark in Boston, Massachusetts, and right now it's under construction, and we plan to turn that on in 2026. And then we're also eyeing the commercial time frame for we will then move to building our first fusion power plant, which will put electrons into the grid in the early 2030s. So there's a lot happening. So I will just show you a few pictures. So people always say, is this really happening? And we welcome visitors to Devens, Massachusetts. It's about an hour west of Boston to see what we're doing. But we have built a manufacturing plant. We are building the magnets, so we're vertically integrated with the core technology that's in our machine. And so we're in the process of building those magnets today in that manufacturing facility, and they will go on a very small truck across campus to our fusion power plant, demonstration plant. And the machine that we're building is called Spark, and this machine will have 13 of the 17 systems that will be required in the actual functioning power plant that will put electrons in the grid. We're not connecting it to the grid, but we want to show the world that you can actually get more power out than in from the design that we've put together. And so we're rapidly working to assemble this machine, and you can see some pictures here of subsystems that are being put into the building. And the picture on the far top right is what the tokamak, the fusion machine, will look like. It sits in the middle of this complex. It's about 9 meters by 9 meters to give you a sense of size of what's happening there. So it's a really exciting time for fusion. It's got tremendous promise, and we're really on the verge of what we think is seeing fusion power play a significant role and scale significantly into the coming decades to answer the problem of growing energy demand while addressing climate change at the same time. So I'll leave that there, and
I'll come up and join
do some
you.
questions. Yeah.
We'll go ahead and grab a seat here. So Jennifer, global executives, policymakers, leaders, I have to tell you, they get site visits all the time. They visit different locations. When they visit your facility in Boston, I have not been, so just to be clear, you should take her up on the invitation, because when they visit your site, they seem to come away changed. What is it about the facility and seeing this firsthand that makes fusion go from theory to reality for a lot of people?
I think it's seeing for your own eyes that we're actually building the machine. And we are building the components to that machine. We have a plan to build a scalable industry. So this machine will look a lot like the power plant. The power plant machine will be about twice that size. But we're designing it in a way that it can scale because everybody gets the same machine. The power plant's going to be a 400 megawatt net electric plant. And you will get a tokamak that can generate that amount of electricity. If you need a gigawatt, you put 2 of them next to each other. But the purpose behind the way we're approaching the business at CFS is we want to be able to build a gigafactory to make magnets and have large-scale production so that in the 2030s, we're deploying the early versions of this. But by the time we're in the 2040s and 2050s, we're able to be deploying thousands of these around the world, because in order to meet the challenge of climate change, you have to be able to do that at this scale. So I think they see, we hire people from Boeing, General Motors, SpaceX, Tesla, companies like that think about production at scale. And when they see it for their own eyes that we're actually doing it, it becomes more real.
I want to give an opportunity. P. Mitchell is engaged here in a technical question that does have to do with scalability.
Sure.
How much more readily accessible are the inputs for fusion than fission? For example, you mentioned, so I'm going to mess this up, deuterium can be extracted from seawater. So what's this mean for scalability?
Yeah, we think that's part of the equation as well. When we built the business, when the founders built the business, they said to themselves, we cannot have special things that make it impossible to be able to scale this industry. And so we have that eye on every component that we put into the machine. So we think the supply chain is scalable in all sorts of ways. Some of it will be people making bets and big capital investments on things. But no, the deuterium, there will have to be people who scale the production of deuterium, but it's readily accessible. So we will see new companies emerge that do that. And from a tritium perspective, tritium is a byproduct. It was a waste product from the fission industry. And now it's interesting, we're starting to talk to a lot of those companies, and they're seeing an opportunity for a market for this byproduct, so that's good for them. But we also designed the machine in a way, in particular at CFS, where we leverage that neutron that comes out of the reaction. And when the neutron goes into our heat capture system, we're using a molten salt blanket to do that. There's lithium in the blanket. So when the neutron, I'm getting technical here, but
technical's good. It's a tech table.
When the neutron hits the lithium, guess what it does? It makes tritium. And so we'll have a closed loop fuel system. And so on my slide, I said grams to gigawatts as an example. So you really only need a few hundred grams of tritium in your machine, and then you'll be self-generating the tritium that's needed for the machine, and you can actually scale tritium production yourself at that point if you want to. So we've thought about the long-term supply chain issues, and with capital investments and some bets from folks that supply some of the materials to this, we know we can get there. And one example is we use high-temperature superconductors in superconducting tape, they call it, in our magnets. That's why we think we have a commercially competitive machine, because it's very small compared to a lot of the other fusion machines that have been built in the past. And we made the HTS market happen. It was a newly developed material that was only commercially available in the 80s. We pretty much made the market by buying a whole bunch of it, and now there's several manufacturers of HTS. So we see that.
So optimistic about scaling in terms of these technologies.
We believe it's possible.
We're going to pivot in a minute here to a conversation on nuclear fission. And so what I want to do is go to regulatory environments. We've seen a lot of movement on fusion lately. How is it being distinguished from what people have been familiar with in the fission space? And how would you like to see the regulatory space for fusion moving forward?
Yeah, that's been an area where I spend a lot of my time doing engagement with governments around the world on the regulatory treatment for commercial fusion. Public safety is always utmost priority, and those are always the basis of all these conversations. But I went through the attributes of fusion and talked about the safety profile being so different, and therefore, from the very beginning, the conversations were the regulations should be different. And so 2 countries have moved forward and made a determination on regulating commercial fusion. The United Kingdom did that about 2.5 years ago, and the US did it last year. And what they did after long public consultation periods over a number of 2 or 3 years, determined that based on the attributes and the safety concerns and the hazards that exist in fusion, it should not be regulated like a fission plant. It should be regulated like a particle accelerator, or if you think about medical equipment that has radioactive materials. So they worry about the byproducts, the radioactive materials that are in it. How are we managing those? How are we keeping the public safe? And then tritium is a low-level radioactive hydrogen isotope. How are you managing your tritium? But we do it today. We know how to do these things. Tritium, for example, it seems like this. I've never heard of tritium. It must be this magical isotope. When you see an exit sign glowing, when all the power's gone out, it glows because there's tritium in it. If you have a diver's watch and it glows underwater, There's tritium in it. So the world knows how to manage tritium safely, but we will have to prove that we can do that to get our licensing. But governments are now taking this up. Canada just announced they're going to pursue a similar approach, and they've started their consultation process. Germany, Japan are also making announcements. So we think that they can leverage what the US and UK have done over the past few years to ensure public safety, while also creating a regulatory environment that allows for rapid scaling of an industry.
Well, this is a brilliant conversation. I should tell the SIEW team and the Energy Market Authority here, you're very popular. I have about 8 more questions. I could keep going, so great job in the audience. I apologize. I got double zeros down here, and they're in red. They haven't started blinking at me yet. It appears we could do a whole series on this. Jennifer, thank you for taking the time to educate us on fusion. It was a really, really great conversation.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the opportunity, and I'll be around for the rest of the day if people do have questions.
You should hang out in the back. Definitely find her for the extra questions, because there's some really good ones in here.
Great. Okay. Thanks, everybody.
Appreciate it. That's great. All right. So from fusion to fission, we're going to have a conversation now on ensuring nuclear innovation with robust security and frameworks around them. So it's my pleasure to invite Dr. Jean-Christophe Neal, Director General of the Institute for Radiation Protection and Nuclear Safety.
Thank you. Good afternoon to all of you. So I am Jean-Christophe Niel. I'm the Director General of the French Institute for Radio Protection and Nuclear Safety. It is a so-called technical safety organization, and for 20 years, IRSN provides a competent, reliable, impartial, and independent technical assessment on radiological risk and nuclear safety. And we provide this to public authorities, ministers, and safety authorities. We are a public organization. These assessments are based on technical and scientific competence of our experts and researchers in the various fields which are connected with radiological and nuclear risk. As you know, in France and in many other countries as well, many challenges are to be faced concerning the renewal of nuclear energy and the management of the associated risk. During COP28, 22 countries, including France, took the initiative to announce that they will increase, to increase their nuclear energy production. Moreover, about 30 countries are considering planning or starting nuclear power programs, and as TSO, Technical Safety Organization, we'll have to face major challenges in the coming years regarding the aging of existing nuclear power plants, those who are already operating, considering the will to extend their lifespan. Second, the use of advanced new fuels. And third, the emergence of new designs for reactors, with some of them already first request of licensing to be anticipated and prepared. So regarding this new reactor, I can indeed mention the so-called SMR, Small Modular Reactor, or AMR, Advanced Modular Reactor. According to the International Atomic Energy Agency, about 80 different designs of such SMR or AMR are developed. I can mention, for example, a small modular reactor which are based on the current light water technology. Most of the more than 400 operating reactors today rely on this light water technology. But I can also mention advanced modular reactor. There are numerous types of them. For example, gas-cooled fast reactor, lead-cooled fast reactor, molten salt reactor, sodium-cooled fast reactor, supercritical water-cooled reactors, very high temperature reactor, and I stop here. As you must have heard also, just some minutes ago, there is also fusion energy. Some tokamaks for research in support of ITER exist. ITER is the International Nuclear Fusion Research Reactor. Some other reactors and projects for fusion are in development, the one which was presented. K-demo in Korea, J-demo in Japan, and also some startups. And their industrialization will come in the longer term. France is engaged for a long time in the ITER project in the south of France. The commissioning of this reactor, meaning the deuterium tritium production phase, is now scheduled after year 2035. The announced growing of nuclear energy also raises issue on the full fuel cycle, in particular in waste management. For example, in France, there is a project of deep geological disposal facility for high-level waste and long-life waste called SIEW. And this project, which is ongoing, is still challenging. For example, on one hand, scientifically, there are remaining questions, such as, for example, about the impact of nuclear safety of possible damage to the rock during storage, before disposal, or during sealing operation. On the other hand, there are also questions on the management of the radioactive waste of the future nuclear program in regard of the capacity of this disposal. Indeed, this underground disposal has been designed according to the production of the existing 57 existing already operating plants. In France, it doesn't take into account all the plants to come. As you can guess, the major challenges for nuclear facility for a TSO is indeed to prevent severe accidents, to mitigate their consequences if they occur, and in any situation to manage the radiological risk, both in normal and incidental operating situation. According to designers, the new technologies I spoke of, SMR, AMR, along with the development of ancient ones, are aiming to reduce the waste and the probability of an accident and to mitigate its consequence. I can give some examples of innovative technology which might be deployed in coming years on current nuclear reactors. For this innovative technology, IRSN and other technical safety organizations like IRSN are mobilized to assess their safety through research action. So some new fuels are called accidental fueled. The aim of the research is to develop nuclear fuels that can tolerate loss of active cooling for a considerably longer period than the existing fuel design. The objective, indeed, is to prevent or delay the release of radionuclides during an accident. Most of SMR and AMR I mentioned are relying on so-called passive systems. Passive systems are supposed to allow the cooling of reactor and of the fuel by the use of natural physical phenomena. The objective is to allow cooling for several days without human intervention or energy supply and save time to undertake the necessary actions to restore the reactor to a safe state. Indeed, the safety of all this innovation has to be demonstrated based on science and supported by a high level of research, not only to be stated. I must insist on that point. Science must remain at the core of nuclear safety, and indeed it should include nuclear safety research. It means that regulators and TSOs, technical safety organizations, should promote research and support operation and the development of research facility. Even better, they should perform research themselves. The objective of this research is to get experimental data. These data are then integrated to numerical codes, and in the end, these codes are composed of the modelization of physical, chemical, thermohydraulical phenomena and of the data from research. They can then simulate what is happening in the reactor and help understand its overall behavior. It is key from the point of nuclear safety, especially in the case of innovative technologies proposed by the designers. Regulators and TSOs might also participate to the development of innovative systems to increase their level of safety. As said 2 years ago at the SIEW 2022, the availability of research facility will be crucial to acquire in-depth scientific knowledge. It also allows a stronger development of competence and human resources, without whom nothing will be possible. The work that we will have to do and the amount of new knowledge we will have to acquire are very important. The cost of research facility is significant. It is clear that a single nation can't achieve that alone, so international collaboration are key to meet these objectives. It should involve all stakeholders, including industry, indeed, TSO, technical safety organization, nuclear safety authorities, and academic research. Moreover, all the stakeholders must share safety concerns very early in the designing process to be sufficiently confident that innovative technology will meet the safety requirements. There are already well-structured international networks for collaboration by sharing research facility. Notably, the Nuclear Energy Agency of the OECD is managing what is called joint projects. These joint projects are gathering in a flexible way and an easy to implement process. Research organization, TSO, academic, to perform research projects in nuclear safety. They are unique tools able to produce high-level experimental data for knowledge production and computer code validation. They also contribute to sustain research facility for nuclear safety. In the same way, the program ICER from the International Atomic Energy Agency dedicated to the training of professionals by the use of experimental reactors is of great utility. Network like the European Technical Safety Organization Network (ETSON), to which IRSN belongs, or the ASEAN Nuclear Power Safety Research in Southeast Asia, constitute also powerful tools to help harmonize and prioritize research projects. So I hope to see many of you in the near future for research collaboration. And IRSN is paving the way in this direction with the National University of Singapore. I would like to thank AME and SIEW for inviting me for this speech. Thank you. I am ready to answer questions.
Please. Dr. Neil, I really appreciate the comments here. You know, I love the flow of the tech table this morning this afternoon because we start, thinking about challenges that are transforming the energy space, and AI is one of them. So we had the opportunity to talk to AirTrunk. Jennifer was just talking about the fusion future and the ability to scale in the 2040s, really 2030s, 2040s, really moving up. But the energy demand needs right now are really weighing heavily on the nuclear fission space. And in the context of SMRs, but also in traditional power plants that are coming back online, most recently the announcement with Microsoft and 3 Mile Island in the United States. With the push for nuclear innovation to meet energy demands, how is that impacting your role in terms of broader safety regulations, and what's evolving to make change in this space given the context of the changing energy landscape?
So thank you for the question. So I tried to explain in my intervention. In fact, the evolution of nuclear fission, at least the will to do that, is twofold. On one side, there is the extension of existing plant. On the other side, there is this new technology. In both cases, the safety must be science and technical based, and in both cases, it must also have the objective to reach a very high level of safety. This requires to get this scientific and technical approach to be able to rely on research capacity. All this innovation, for example, for existing plants, there are a lot of innovation in the industry to try to find new fuels which will be more tolerant to accident, and this is to be validated by research. So I would like to add something which is beyond science, which is first a high level of safety, but the second is you won't have a nuclear fission in the long term if you don't have confidence of the people. And the safety assessment is also a way to engage the public in discussion about nuclear fission.
Maybe another way to change that question around a little bit is if we know the science and the technical capacities of how to maintain the safety at the highest bar, is the sector ready to grapple with the increasing demand for the technologies as we look at Gen 3 SMRs, Gen 4 SMRs, the existing light water large-scale reactors, again, kind of having a renaissance of their own? How do you feel in terms of the preparedness of the safety aspects of the nuclear sector to grapple with that demand signal?
Okay, clearly, regarding the economic aspect, it's not my role to discuss of that. What I can say that there are, on the other hand, a strong demand on the human resources. For example, in France, so you know that France has decided to extend the lifetime of reactor beyond 60 years. It has to be once more demonstrated, but it is a will. And the new EPR reactors have been decided to be launched by the President of the Republic, 6 of them. And the evaluation by the industry of the the work resources is the need to recruit 100,000 people in 10 years, half of them to compensate the people who are leaving, and half of them because of the new tendency. So it's a huge process. And from that point of view, RSN, which is a small organization compared to these big numbers, we are 1,800, is also facing this objective of getting the good and smart people to be able to do the assessment and the research.
I know that we're having a conversation about deploying technology, but there is a great question here about the full life cycle, and I'm just going to read it out loud. With increasing interest in deploying SMRs in the region, it's crucial to consider whether existing nuclear powers are prepared to accept the implications of new countries managing nuclear fuel and byproducts. So there's a conversation about the back end of the fuel cycle here. Are these established nuclear nations in a position to embrace a shift and allow emerging nuclear countries, i.e. Singapore as an example, to handle such materials? How do we grapple with that?
So once more, there are two phases to the question. So economic one, I'm not the good person to answer, and the capacity of plants to produce. Regarding the technical side, in SMR, you have in fact the idea, as I mentioned, identify 80 different designs. What you can see is that there are designs which are quite mature because they are quite similar to the existing design. It's light water reactor. And so for this kind of reactor, either the technology of the reactor or the fuel, I do not anticipate difficulties, even if once more the designers and promoter of this industry will have to prove it. For other technologies, you can have neutron fast reactors with sodium and high temperature reactor, where there are some expert feedback from the years 60s and 70s where things should be achievable. And then you have other technology which are much more innovative and where the question is much more open, including the technology for the fuel.
Well, we're unfortunately out of time. I really much appreciate you coming to talk to us about the safety in the nuclear fission space. We have a robust nuclear energy policy initiative at the Atlantic Council in Washington, D.C., so if you ever come through, please do visit us. Please join me and thank you.
Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you very much. All right, from fission, and now to sustainable aviation fuel. It's my pleasure to invite Stephen Bartholomew, Head of Public and Regulatory Affairs for the Asia Pacific in Neste. Stephen.
Thank you. Good afternoon. And my many thanks to the organizers and the sponsors for this opportunity to touch very briefly on sustainable aviation fuel and the greening of aviation here in the Asia-Pacific region. I'd like to start with an audience question rather than the audience asking me a question. How many of you travel from overseas to be here? Just a show of hands. We don't need high-tech mobile phones and all that. So if you travel from overseas, raise your hands. And I'm not going to flight shame you, I promise. For those of you who did raise your hands, I'm assuming you came by aeroplane, unless you have your own private yacht. But for those of you who did raise your hands, would you have any idea what the greenhouse gas emissions per person for your flight was? You probably haven't looked at the ticket, and fair enough. I've only started looking at the tickets once I started working at Neste. So let me just give you an example. I recently traveled to New Zealand to meet with some stakeholders and traveled, I won't mention the name of the airline, but I flew on a Boeing 777 from Singapore to Auckland. And the emissions per person, or the CO2 equivalent emissions per person for that flight from Singapore to Auckland was 2,690 kilograms. That's just one way. So coming back an additional 2,690 kilograms. And that's on a flight of about 8,400 kilometers. If aviation is set to grow and continue, and it wants to be more sustainable, we have to change. And sustainable aviation fuels are a solution. So what then are sustainable aviation fuels? SAF is a sustainable alternative to conventional fossil-based jet fuel and is produced 100% from renewable waste and residue raw materials. Now, today, there are 7 ASTM, or American Society for Testing and Material approved pathways for the production of alternative jet fuel. And HEFA, or hydrotreated esters and fatty acids, SPK standing for synthetic paraffinic kerosene, is kind of the most prevalent pathway today. But others, such as Fischer-Tropsch SPK, ATJ SPK, which is alcohol to jet, and also synthesized isoparaffins are among ASTM-approved pathways. Now today, the ASTM only allows sustainable aviation fuel to be used in blends of up to 50%. But in its neat form, sustainable aviation fuels can reduce greenhouse gas emissions by up to 80% over fossil fuels over the life cycle. I think the other important thing about sustainable aviation fuels, when you compare it to, let's say, the future of electric or hydrogen-powered planes, is that these fuels are compatible with existing jet engines and also existing fuel supply infrastructure. Somebody asked me on the first day of this event, when I was over lunch, and I was telling him what I do, he said, so is this fuel commercially available today? Yes, it is. It's not available in the quantities that we need it, but it is commercially available and in use today. And unlike offsets, it offers in-sector emissions. Okay, so that's sustainable aviation fuel. Why then do we need it? I think the answer is pretty obvious. Firstly, aviation has committed to net zero by 2050. And today, aviation accounts for about 2 to 3% of greenhouse gas emissions. But with the aviation sector set to grow, this could rise to about 20% by 2050 if no action is taken and other sectors start to decarbonize. In addition to the climate impact of aviation CO2 emissions, we also have other impacts which are non-CO2 related, like contrail cirrus clouds, which also are responsible for climate change. Now, there are a number of pathways for aviation to decarbonize, including technology, such as electric and hydrogen-powered aircraft, which are available in the future, operations and infrastructure, but also offsets. But if aviation is to reach its goal of net zero by 2050, sustainable aviation fuels will deliver around 65% of the emissions reduction. What then are the barriers for sustainable aviation fuels? Well, firstly, as I already mentioned, we just don't have enough of it. And we need to explore multiple pathways to ensure that we have enough supplies of sustainable aviation fuel. And that means looking beyond the existing HEFA pathways, which is where we use waste oils and fats, primarily used cooking oil and animal fat. Now here in the Asia-Pacific region, we are quite rich in resources to manufacture sustainable aviation fuels. World Economic Forum and Neste's own modeling shows that there's roughly about 30 million tons of waste oils and fats available globally, out of which about 15 million tons of these waste oils and fats are available in the Asia-Pacific region. But this is only going to grow by about another 20 million tons by 2050. So if we are to replace nearly 300 million tons of traditional jet fuel, we're going to need a lot more than 50 million tons of sustainable aviation fuel. So what this means is that new feedstock technologies, like novel vegetable oils, so these are cover crops or intermediate crops, algae oils, lignocellulosics, which is forestry waste and residue, municipal solid waste, and then in the future, hydrogen and powder liquids are all technologies that will need to be developed further. Second, in the same way as we develop new technologies and feedstocks to meet this demand, we need to accelerate policy development, especially enabling policies that create demand certainty. Globally, we see that these policies tend to be a mix of the carrot and stick, incentives being preferred in the United States, while mandates or obligations are the preferred method in the EU, and we are seeing mandates and obligations also picking up here in the Asia-Pacific region. So in conclusion, aviation is set to grow globally in the next 2 decades, and if no action is taken to decarbonize, aviation emissions are also set to grow and keep pace with the growth of aviation. Sustainable aviation fuels are a solution that are available today and can help reduce emissions in sector. But greening aviation will depend on sustainable aviation fuels, but to ensure that we have enough of it by 2050, we will need technology advances and the political will to drive enabling policies. Thank you.
Well, Stephen, go ahead and grab a seat here. I have to say, you know you had a good presentation when you preempted every single one of my questions. So we'll see how this goes. You know, in a former life, I was actually an Air Force officer. So I came out of the University of Southern California and went into the military, and the Air Force obviously is thinking through this technology base. You spent a lot of time talking about the incentives of sustainability and climate change and needing to hit our emissions profile. Are there other tailwinds, pun intended, to see SAF really take off? I'm thinking about security, and you know, a key thematic that I'm seeing around capitals around the world is the aspect of indigenous resources, you know, thinking about those kind of aspects. What does that mean for SAF?
I think that's a really good question, because I think one of the things that we are seeing certainly here in the Asia-Pacific region is the recognition by many countries in this part of the world that they are rich in the resources that are required to manufacture sustainable aviation fuel. And they also see SAF in some ways as providing, like other biofuels, providing energy security. So if you look at some of the countries here in the Asia-Pacific region, if you just take used cooking oil, China is the largest producer today of used cooking oil, producing nearly 5 million tons of it. India has the potential to get close. Unfortunately, a lot of the oil keeps getting recycled in the food system. So what we're seeing, and this is a matter that I think that probably will have to be looked at moving forward, is that there is a growing sentiment, if you like, of one, which is feedstock protectionism. So countries looking at keeping those feedstocks in their country, or incentivizing domestic production like Japan has just done with a 30 yen per liter tax credit for domestically produced sustainable aviation fuels. So incentivizing domestic production, that helps the industry grow, but protectionism will push us back.
You know, I don't mean to trivialize the sustainability aspect, obviously. I think it's a critical component of the conversation around SAF. And MOI has asked a really interesting question here, which I think is important to tackle. From a carbon footprint perspective, why is deploying SAF a better option than just finding alternative routes of offsetting carbon emissions? Thinking about you know, the use of traditional fuels with carbon offsets of some sort.
Look, offsets have their place, and I think we need to look at all solutions if we are going to tackle the issue of climate change. The difference is that sustainable aviation fuels, these are actual molecules that go into an aircraft. So it is in-sector emissions. And I think there's a lot to be said about in-sector emissions compared to planting trees in some other part of the world. So offsets have their place, but the reality is if you want to get the level of emissions that are required to tackle the issues around decarbonizing aviation, we really need to push for in-sector emissions.
You know, I'm going to do a little bit of a modification in this conversation. Michelle Bell asked, how do we get past the chicken and egg issues of SAF? It seems demand isn't robust enough, incentives and supply, enough to incentivize supply, but supplies are too small to keep costs low and grow demands. So obviously we do have a chicken and egg aspect to this, but I'm going to tailor this question to say, what are the specific near-term policy signals or actions that you need to help further enable the sector to really grow? And I know we're seeing some momentum. It's fair to say, because of the Inflation Reduction Act, for example, a scale of cap on a percentage basis is massive new capital inflows to the sector.
Absolutely. So as I said earlier, I think it's a mix of incentives and obligations that are required to really drive this sector forward. In the United States, you have the Inflation Reduction Act, and we've seen how that has influenced companies to make the right decisions. Japan announced a 10% mandate in May 2023. Since that announcement, 5 Japanese fuel producers have announced plans to build sustainable aviation fuel refineries. We're talking about a highly capex-intensive industry. Neste has the world's largest sustainable aviation fuel refinery right here in Singapore. To expand the refinery, the existing refinery, from 1.2 million tons to 2.5 million tons, we were looking at a capex cost of 1.65 billion euro. So you're not, when you're talking about scale, it's a significant investment. And as I said, creating that demand certainty for the investment either comes through incentives, like in the case of the United States or Japan, or it comes in the form of mandates like we see in Europe. Just as an example, Langdon, there is a fuels research company, I won't name them, that has done some really good work on sustainable aviation fuel and refineries globally. And I'm referring to the 2022 data because I haven't seen the 2023 data. But in 2022, there were 144 announced sustainable aviation fuel refineries. There were only 15 producing sustainable aviation fuel refineries. So we really need to scale up.
Well, scale ends up talking about finance, right? And so there's a question here that basically is an indirect way of saying this. When we think about the commercial viability of the sector, how much on average will fuel use of SAF increase the costs of air travel? So thinking about air travel as a stimulus for SAF, what is the implied cost of carbon required in that model?
Well, let me answer that question with a great example from Singapore. So Singapore, in February 2024, announced the Sustainable Air Hub Blueprint, and they've come up with a slightly different model to a mandate or an incentive. And that's a levy on the price of a ticket for all flights departing out of Singapore. For a flight from Singapore to Bangkok on economy class, the additional cost of the SAF levy will be about $3. On a flight to Tokyo, Hong Kong, or to Melbourne, it's roughly about $6, 6 Singapore dollars. On a flight to the United Kingdom or to some part of Europe, it'll be about 16 US dollars. You can't buy a cup of coffee anywhere in Changi Airport for $6, I can tell you that.
No, that's a great perspective. Well, unfortunately, we're out of time, Stephen. This is a great conversation. Really excited to see this sector continue to grow, and look forward to seeing you at future tech tables. Thank you. Great. Well, it's my pleasure now to move on to another really exciting technology and invite Sheena Thomas, for the Interim General Manager of Research Strategy and Partnership at GNS Science, to come up to talk about super hot geothermal. Sheena?
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Landon, for that introduction. I'm really excited to delve into super hot geothermal with you guys. I was given a limit of 3 slides, but I've cheated a little bit, and so a couple of them are videos. Now, super hot geothermal is really an extension of geothermal energy that I'm sure all of you know about already. So New Zealand is very blessed. Some may say blessed, some may say cursed with a volcanic region. And with that comes this wonderful silver lining of accessible energy right under our feet. So the slide behind me shows already developed geothermal areas in New Zealand. So GNS Science, a geological research organization, and we also do a whole lot of consulting work, and we do a whole lot of geothermal development work in New Zealand as well as globally. So we've been involved in geothermal development in New Zealand for over 70 years, and we've been involved in global developments, particularly in Philippines, Indonesia, and Japan for decades and decades as well. So for those of you who aren't already aware, the beauty of geothermal energy is that it is 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, doesn't matter if it's rain, wind, or shine. So it's an incredibly promising baseload energy solution. I don't have to talk to you about the need to increase renewable energy generation. You've heard a lot about that already this week. And in New Zealand itself, we are looking at demand increase of about 50% to 2050, at least 50% to 2050. And if we want to accelerate electrification of industry and electrification of the transport fleet, you're looking at something more akin to doubling renewable energy generation. Now, solar and wind will play a huge role in this, obviously, as will batteries, but it's just not going to be enough. So, GNS Science has been researching the potential for super hot geothermal for the last 15 or so years, but it really came to a head over the last 5 years, where we've really looked at what is the resource potential if we go deeper. And so based on inventory assessments, the potential is huge. So we have a team of extremely excited scientists at GNS Science, because just in areas that are unprotected in the Taupo volcanic region, we're looking at 30,000 gigawatt hours of potential energy. So this is not in protected land or anything like that. This is in unprotected, this is accessible land. Behind me is the geothermal energy that we already produce in the gray. The 3,500 of megawatt electric capacity that we have there is what we estimate to be the potential energy from already producing conventional geothermal fields. So what is superhot geothermal? Well, in New Zealand, we're specifically focused on what we call supercritical geothermal energy. So this is deeper, hotter geothermal, so over 370 degrees Celsius, where it enters into a supercritical state, and 220 bar of pressure. Beautifully illustrated there. Thank you for my wonderful comms team. And in that state, it carries 3 times more enthalpy than conventional geothermal fluids. We're looking at a distance of over 3K. So in New Zealand, our deepest geothermal wells are around 3 kilometers deep. We're also really lucky in that we have shallow magma ponds, basically. So we estimate that we can actually reach these supercritical resources between 4 and 6 kilometers deep, which isn't really all that much more. Now, that's all well and good, but the million-dollar question is always, is it economic, right? Is it realistic? Because without that, then, you know, it's a real uphill battle if it happens at all. So what we did is, being a team of scientists, we engaged a global economic and strategy consultancy called Castalia to do some economic analysis for us, to look at really how does this potential stack up against the other options available to us in New Zealand. And to our delight, we found that it is, in fact, economic. So what Castalia did was basically they modeled the potential, they carried out grid modeling effectively. So in a perfect market, they've made the assumptions that you will max out the logical solar, wind, battery capacity. And then we looked at, well, what then would you need to do to ensure firm capacity? And so that's why you see your overbuilt solar, overbuilt wind, gas for peaking, and battery storage. And as you can see, there is, in fact, a huge and affordable role for supercritical geothermal to play against the backdrop of a renewable energy system. So that's all well and good, but we are also an island at the bottom of the world, so what does it mean for everyone else? Well, we're not the only ones looking at tapping into deeper, hotter resources. There's a huge program of work going on in the United States, in Iceland, in Japan. There's been some work in Mexico and Italy as well as other regions, as illustrated behind me. The beauty of Doing this work in New Zealand, though, as I mentioned before, is that it's shallower and our crust is easier to drill through, so we can really have a test bed for innovation to test our supercritical fluids, to test the materials that we need to utilize these supercritical fluids. So we really want to invite international collaborators to come and help us with this, particularly engineering companies, material science companies, power plant companies. It just makes a whole lot more sense to test it in a region where there is already deep expertise in geothermal and where it is more accessible. And we see a lot of what we discover in New Zealand and what we learn in New Zealand can have applications for different types of advanced geothermal as well. That's really a bit of a summary of super hot geothermal. I'm sure Landon will have plenty of questions and also around for the rest of the evening if anyone wants to talk more. Thank you.
I'm not short of questions. Go ahead, have a seat. But I welcome the audience to contribute a few as well. You know, Shana, thank you so much. I do like the graphics, by the way, so it compliments truly to your comms team.
No, shout out to the comms team.
The second one in particular, I think it really puts it in context of why and how you're tapping a different resource base. I want to take a little bit different direction because I think you really provided a comprehensive summary there. You know, what I'm seeing is a renaissance, or maybe not a renaissance. We've had a traditional geothermal for a long time. You have it in New Zealand. You mentioned Iceland, Nevada. There's places that have the resource, but in terms of scale, people are increasingly thinking about geothermal. What is catalyzing this energy behind the sector around the world right now to see it become a more relevant part and segment of the value chain?
Yeah, look, if anything, I think people expected this catalysis to happen sooner. It's a little bit, for those of us in the industry, it just feels like a complete no-brainer, to be honest, and particularly if you already have the resources sitting there. So there's still a lot of untapped conventional geothermal resources. In New Zealand, we've already tapped into a lot of the conventional resources, which is why we're looking at super hot. But I think for a long time we have anticipated more investment from the oil and gas sector, who might be looking to pivot from oil and gas into renewable energy generation, and we're starting to see an uptick in that now. I think another huge catalyst actually has been AI and big data centers who are extremely power hungry,
right.
And they need renewable baseload 24/7 generation, and variable energy without a whole lot of batteries doesn't really do the same thing. So I think those are probably two of the macro trends that is really helping geothermal have its moment.
The AI and data center one's interesting because I think, we already talked about it. There is an aspect of AI driving the data center demand signal, driving a resurgence in nuclear energy. I'm thinking about the regulatory frameworks. That one's actually pretty well known. I'm not sure there's a lot of context for the regulatory frameworks and needs for geothermal. Is it a lighter lift? Is it something that can be deployed without as much framework around it, or what do we need to see in terms of the enabling environment of the policy to help get geothermal out and commercialized ASAP?
Yeah, the regulatory frameworks, we don't believe it will be a whole lot more different for supercritical geothermal than it would be for conventional geothermal right now. What we really want to do next is start on a research exploration campaign. Basically, we need to drill a few holes to really understand, prove out our hypothesis, understand the conditions, the nature of the fluids, and all of that. And as part of that as well, we need to understand, right, are there different consenting requirements that we might need? Because the process itself is pretty much the same as conventional geothermal energy. You'd still need to manage your fluids. You still need to ensure you have really careful site selection. You still really need social acceptance and engaging with the landowners. And there is a well-established resource consenting process for geothermal energy as well, which is really stringent. But given we've been doing it for 70-odd years, it is not unknown.
You know, this is an interesting conversation just about the maturity of the technology. I'm going to take X as anonymous, so thank you for the contribution. Is super hot the final frontier for geothermal, or can we go deeper in the future, tap even hotter and even higher pressure resources? You know, what's the maturity of this technology? And maybe your last statement, just noting that we need to go through and drill some wells and find a little bit of maturity on the existing concept of super hot, implies that it's at the frontier. But what do you really see in the future of the sector overall?
Look, I'm not sure about how much deeper. I am a fan of Journey to the Center of the Earth, but that's I don't know, quite simply. I'm not a geoscientist myself. However, there are different sorts of technologies looking at capitalizing on super hot geothermal. So you'll hear from Evor next. So there is enhanced geothermal as well, where you basically create cracks in areas where there may not already be cracks, which makes it more easily accessible, where there isn't already those natural conditions. There's closed loop geothermal as well. So not sure about deeper, but there's certainly different types of technologies that can make it more accessible in countries that don't have volcanic regions. Right. So not the final frontier. You had the great image of the world going around, and we're talking about partnerships. So clearly partnerships an aspect of this that you're trying to build out now. Why did you identify the regional leaders that you did on the slide that you presented, the revolving world? Is it because of their history with geothermal resources, or is there something novel that we should be tapping in the context of the technology? Quite simply because they've got active supercritical or super hot geothermal programs going on right now. So the US has a huge program, Forge in Utah, which you probably know about, and the Clean Air Task Force is building a global consortium to share knowledge and try and fast-track technology. Iceland's on their third deep research well, and Japan's got a program going on as well. So moving past just the maturity of the R&D around the sector, thinking about being here in Singapore and the resource base of the region, what is, if we can get this to work, what does it mean globally? Do you see a global footprint that then can expand at an accelerated rate once we pass the R&D phase? Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, first and foremost, I mean, the most obvious countries would be ones with volcanic regions of their own. So, you know, Indonesia's your neighbor. And Philippines is not all that far away. So, you know, we're talking about ASEAN connected grids. Perhaps that's something that could actually mean something for Singapore. But also what we learned from this really is another stepping stone to geothermal being more accessible in more places. So I don't want to steal Paul's thunder, but, you know, there could be some interesting cross applications between supercritical geothermal and other types of technologies that can utilize the heat from the earth. Well, we are doubling down on geothermal. I really appreciate you making the time to bring us, get a little bit more familiarity with super hot geothermal, and I wish you success on building those partnerships. Please do find Shayna after the conversation. Really, really fascinating space. Thank you for the time. Thanks, Landon. Thanks, everyone. Great. Now we're going to move on and have a little bit of conversation again on geothermal here with Paul Carnes, who's the Chief Business Development Officer at Evor Technologies out of Canada on enabling local clean energy autonomy. Paul, good to see you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to try to catch up a little time. I know we're all a little bit over. Sheena was good enough to do a really good intro on a lot of the geothermal topics I'm going to talk about today. Starting with what's up on the screen right now is what you probably think geothermal is, and this is what geothermal is, but what everyone's heard of or thinks of in geothermal is pretty much on the screen right now. We call these, just to be very broad, open loop systems. You are requiring something in the ground, something that Mother Nature has put there for you to access. You have, geosciences try to discover it, and then you try to drill and access to it. It's a lot like the oil and gas industry. There is a question mark whether or not you will find what you're looking for in traditional or open loop geothermal. I think I'm pressing the button just right here. Here we go. On the other side of the fence, up on the screen, is closed loop. And Sheena mentioned a little bit about closed loop. And on the far right-hand side, those last three models that you see is what we call everloops. This is a specialized type of geothermal system. It is, simply put, building a radiator into the ground. We drill everloops. We are drilling for a target that you cannot miss. We're simply drilling for depth. An analogy that is used a lot, or we use a lot at Ever, is to say that in traditional geothermal, not supercritical, what Sheena was talking about, there's more targets, there's more opportunities for supercritical. But in traditional geothermal, you're literally looking for that needle in the haystack. Small operators, this is an answer maybe, Sheena, to what you were it's my opinion anyways, as to why geothermal's been talked about for so long, but it has never seemed to take off. Small operators, they just simply cannot handle that risk of, will I find it? Are the geoscientists correct that there's this opportunity deep in the earth? And big oil and gas companies who can tolerate that risk of looking into the earth, and the geoscientists, are they right, are they wrong, etc. They require massive scale, or else it just doesn't matter to their business models. So there's not a lot of needles in the haystack. They are hard to find. But with a closed loop system, like I say, we are working in the entirety of the haystack. It's just a matter of how deep you can go. Another thing that was brought up in the previous presentation, how deep can you go? Well, oil and gas rigs, onshore rigs have limits on weight as to how deep they can go into the ground. That weight limit is based on the casing that is used. Drill pipe weighs less than casing. I don't know exactly how much less, but quite a bit less. So you can go deeper into the ground with a drill pipe than you can with casing. But in oil and gas, why would you go so deep into the ground? Or traditional geothermal, open loop systems, why would you go so deep into the ground if you couldn't then put the casing in that deep into the ground? You wouldn't have the rig weight to put the casing into the ground. With our systems, with the Everloop systems, we don't use casing. We use a different type of way to seal off the rock. So we have the ability to go incredibly deep into the ground, well beyond 5 kilometers, perhaps into that, well, certainly into the 7 to 9 kilometer depths. And as you can see on the screen, perhaps even a lot deeper. So our mission, as the last point said, is to enable clean local energy autonomy everywhere. The hard part, coming up next here, here we go, clean local energy autonomy everywhere. The hard part about energy autonomy is that it has to be abundant. You have to have a lot of it. Similarly to why oil and gas companies really didn't get into geothermal. They would dabble into it, but they would always end up pulling out. There just wasn't enough opportunity for them. It has to be an abundant thing. If you're going to provide energy autonomy to a region, you need a lot of it, or else it's just a niche, sometimes science experiment, like a great green system, but it's not really doing anything to transform the energy stack of the region. So to be truly scalable, you want to have some sort of energy system that lets you put about as much of this as you want wherever it is you want it. And that's what an Everloop allows you to do. Put about as much as you want wherever you do want it. We look at Ever with the concept of transforming the world's energy stack. And I know that's a big statement, but again, when you're working in the whole of the haystack, that opportunity is there. It's just a matter of drilling. Currently, the cost of one of these Everloops, we've zoomed into one on the screen, is simply too high to go everywhere. Like a lot of first things, like maybe every first of a kind, the first ones cost, frankly, too much. Building a first one, the engineers in my firm don't like it when I say this, but I think it's kind of funny, so I'll say it anyway. When you're building one of these first ones, it's like having a license to light money on fire, right? Like no one should be expecting in some of these first, and all the technologies were talked about today, please, no one be expecting an economic outcome that's interesting to anybody, and especially your bankers, out of a first one. It's what comes next. It's the opportunity to go further. With an Everloop and with new types of geothermal and other types of technology was talked about today, if it's a scalable system, if it's got the chance to be very abundant, the economics of those first couple shouldn't matter. So the solution is everybody here, is all of you. That's how we see it at Ever. And what it takes is people, partnerships, and supply chains. I've been to the conference a couple days, and this supply chains thing has come up a lot, and I've been delighted to hear it. People are recognizing that it isn't just have a great technology and then show up somewhere, right? You need a community, you need others around you to support that infrastructure. And if you're a first-of-a-kind technology requiring specialized services or supports, well, that supply chain just isn't there. Happily, in the geothermal industry, there are places around the world that have these supply chains. Just look anywhere that has a hydrocarbon industry. They are drillers. They are drilling into the ground. Not necessarily as deep as we're planning to drill, but nonetheless, the supply chain is there. But just having a supply chain, just building supply chain, that's going to require people. At Ever, we spend a lot of our time and energy on people's side of things. I've heard people mentioned at the conference, not as much as I'd like to have it be pointed out. That's probably the #1 bottleneck in the future. I'm from Calgary, Alberta, Canada. Any other Canadians in the room other than my colleague? No? Okay. Well, we drill. We're drillers. Think of us like Texas, except colder. So we have a lot of people there that understand how to drill and are part of these supply chains. But the University of Calgary, in the last 3 years, no longer has a petroleum engineering program. It's incredible to me to see that. Why is this? The oil and gas industry is not what people in junior high and high school dream about entering into one day. They want to get into renewables. They want to get other things. Well, geothermal is going to need those geoscientists, engineers, and other professionals. We say at Ever that those changing the world's energy stack by building Everloops, those drillers and engineers and geoscientists, doing that in 15 years are in junior high today. And none of them seem to be interested in getting into the field. So we're looking at scholarships. We're looking at addressing people around the world as to how to improve upon that. Partnerships has been talked about a lot. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. You do need these strong partners. If you put your people and your partnerships together, you can build the supply chains. Supply chains will be the key for any technology to move down that learning curve and lower the overall cost. Again, not when you're lighting money on fire on those first couple, but later you're going to need that supply chain to be able to move down any learning curve. So I'm kind of at the end. Not as fancy as Sheena's animations, but I kind of look at to where the population is. I look around the world where we're already starting and having relationships, building relationships with new partners, establishing people, and where we're looking for supply chains around the world where we're going to be building these, like I say, Everloops. So we're not just building projects. At Ever, we're building industries. And that's what's required if you really want to be scalable and really make a difference. So thanks very much, and I guess I'm ready for questions.
Let's go grab a seat. Leave it to a good-natured Canadian to get the first laugh of the day. I tried, but you actually succeeded. So you brought up a lot of questions for me. Just listening to the conversation. In particular, you and Shannon both talked about the oil and gas industry. And, is that because you want the oil and gas industry to be inspiration for this? Are there actual aspects of the value chain that they need to export to the industry to scale? What's the relationship there?
Sure. Well, it is a little bit in our hearts to want to say something good about the oil and gas industry. And there's a lot of good things to say about that. But this closed loop system that we're looking at is really quite new. And I will tell you that if you look at where the drilling industry or where the oil and gas industry was 15 years ago, never mind the economics not being grand on a first one, it just simply wasn't possible. In the United States, you saw that the development of a lot of multilateral horizontal drilling in the Marcellus Basin in northern central United States. In Alberta, where I'm from, we saw the SAGD industry come along, and there's these basically putting heat into the ground efficiently to loosen up the oil and gas so that you can pump it out efficiently in these multilateral, long-ranging systems. How they do that, how they drill that is extremely complicated, but it has become so like factory building. It's just become so simple for them to be able to do and repeatable. Really all we've done at Ever is take those technologies as they've been developed, retool them, do them a little bit differently than they've been done in the oil and gas industry. But the people that we have working in our industry are just straight over. You talk about a transition, they're just straight over from the oil and gas industry side of things. So the oil and gas industry is, from our point of view, the backbone of geothermal.
Great. I mean, that actually puts it in context, and I appreciate the answer there. As I've said before, this is an opportunity to take on some of the risk profile that people see in the technologies as well. And you asked, I think, a valid question, thinking about oil and gas and unconventional drilling in particular. Is there a greater seismic risk associated with closed-loop technologies as opposed to open-loop? How can we de-risk those elements, particularly seismic activity in different regions?
Sure. We get this question a lot, and I'm sure all geothermal people get this question quite a little bit. Traditional geothermal is interacting with the reservoir. It is pumping colder water in, or it is certainly pulling, hopefully, hotter water out of the ground. You're kind of having an interaction in a grand overall area. I am not a geoscientist. I have no idea if that truly causes earthquakes. A lot of people think it does. I don't know. EGS, which is where looks very similar. You drill into the ground, but then you frack. You send high pressure volumes of water or colder water into the formation to crack the rock to make the communication from your injector well to your producing well, to make it happen, to make it more viable, make it, you produce more overall water that way. There are people that believe that fracking causes earthquakes. I don't have the first clue whether or not it does. What I do know is drilling a hole into the ground, which is all that an Everloop is doing. We're simply building a radiator. They all say it in inches in the United States, so we say it that way too, but an 8.5-inch hole drilled into the ground, dozens of them, is not causing seismicity. Also is survived if seismicity were to occur for whatever natural reasons in around the area. So again, with a closed loop system, you can put it anywhere you want. So you can put it in places that aren't problematic, like usually the ring of fire for problematic for seismicity. But certainly the way we build the radiators into the ground, there's no seismicity risk.
Going back to a key feature of your presentation was on supply chains, and you mentioned something in passing that I thought was really interesting, which is an element of unique casing for the wells. Are there elements in the supply chain, the value chain, that maybe we're overlooking that are really critical? What is on a more granular level, the supply chain that you really need to maximize here?
Sure. Well, what I mentioned in the presentation was that we don't use casing. So we've somehow sealed off the reservoir.
And this is IP.
Yeah, it is. It's the IP is more in how you apply it and how you put it into place. There's a little bit of intellectual property that we own with the formula for what this fluid is, but I don't think there's a lot of oil and gas people in the room, so I won't bother going through it. But we use a type of chemical. It's not toxic in any way or anything like that bonds with the rock. Much like, here I'll have a simple way of explaining it. When you paint your wall, you put a filter cake, you put a layer, a very thin layer of paint on the wall. But when you stain your deck, you're not putting stain on the deck. The fluid goes into the wood and kind of stays in the wood and bonds and makes it waterproof and that sort of thing. It's exactly what our system is doing. Our intellectual property is how we apply it. What you may not know, most people don't know, is that 50% of the cost of drilling is the cost of buying the casing and placing it in the ground. The same rig puts the casing in, the same rig that used drill pipe to drill, that places the casing in the ground. That's half the cost of drilling. At Ever, because we're not using casing, we avoid half the cost of drilling. So with these long amounts of drillings that we do, we're doing it at half the cost of what, say, the oil and gas industry would expect.
Well, Paul, unfortunately up on time here. Very excited to see Ever's progress in the space. Maybe a big year for you next year as the G7 comes to Canada. So maybe attention, opportunity to highlight geothermal there.
It will be indeed. Thank you very much.
I really appreciate it. Thank you. Great. And closing out today's conversations, we're going to have one more presentation on geothermal. I guess it's a hot topic, maybe super hot. Professor Alessandro Romagnoli from the Energy Research Institute at Nanyang Technological University is now going to join us. Professor?
Sorry, we're networking.
It's good. Good use of time.
Yeah, thank you. All right. Good afternoon, everybody. So I'm not here to actually to promote any specific technology, but today's intention for my presentation is actually to give you a little bit of insight on some of the work that we've done at NTU together with some of our partnering institutions like TUM from Munich and Urbana-Jurong on evaluating the geothermal potential for Singapore. So the why we started this project. So for those of you who don't know, in Singapore there are plenty of hot springs. In fact, if you look at the pictures on the left-hand side, you can see a number of hot springs with the temperature of the hot springs coming out. And then if you look on the picture on your right-hand side, you also see that there is a map of the heat flow in this region of the world, and as you can see, Singapore seems to have what we call a sort of high heat flow capacity, which is almost twice as much that of the what we call continental average, right? So the heat flow basically it means the ability, well, it means it intends the heat that can flow from the inner core of the Earth all the way up to the surface. So this is something that we know. But what we wanted to do, we wanted to actually investigate and validate some of this information. So what we did, we started a project in 2021, and we started by mapping the surface. We come up with a sort of surface heat map of Singapore, and we identified in the northeastern region here the hot spring in Sembawang as the hottest part where we might want to actually do some drilling. We identified two sites near the hot spring. One is near Sembawang, it's around 1 kilometer from the hot spring, and another one further north, around 3 to 4 kilometers. And as you can see on the pictures on the right-hand side, we drill to slim boreholes, slim wells, down to 1.1 kilometers for what you consider the site further north, and down to 1.7 kilometers for the well, which is closer to the hot spring. So which are the results out of this investigation? So as you can see on the pictures on the left-hand side, so the diagrams show the depth versus the temperature, right? And the gray solid lines represent the temperatures, gradients, measurements that have been taken worldwide in geological settings which are non-volcanic. So in Singapore, as you know, we are sitting in a non-volcanic region, so we wanted to compare geological setting which are non-volcanic with Singapore. So the blue line and the red line, the solid part, represent the measurements that we took. And as you can see, for the red line, which is the deepest, down to 1.7 kilometers, we could measure a temperature of about 122 degrees Celsius. And if you compare these measurements against all the other available data that we have worldwide, you can see that the red bars seem to score pretty well, right? So which means that in Singapore, there is quite a potential for geothermal. And if you look at the gradient, which means the amount of temperature per kilometer, so we are talking about a gradient of potentially 40 to 44 degrees per kilometer, which is quite outstanding to my mind if you compare to other gradients that more conventional, that may be in the order of 30 or 30 plus degrees per kilometers. So we took our measurements and we in fact extrapolated, right, the measurements linearly all the way down to 4 to 5 kilometers. And by doing so, because in Singapore, of course, we are dealing with the hot, dry rock, granite, and by doing so, we could sort of foresee that potentially the temperature at that of 4 to 5 kilometers could reach more than 230 degrees Celsius, which would make it, good enough for power generation. Then, like I mentioned before, there is that other aspect of the heat flow, right? So we did some assessment of the core rock conditions. I'm not going to enter into the details, but if you look at the box at the bottom of the slide, what we could evaluate is that the heat flow that we could measure in Sembawang and Admiralty sits between 112 and 144 microwatt per square meters, which seems to confirm the initial estimate that was indicated before, that indeed Singapore has almost doubled the average continental heat flow capacity. So in conclusion, really what we can say, Singapore is hot, but actually not, it's hot because of the weather, but also underneath there is a lot of heat. The geothermal gradient is higher than most other similar geologic or non-volcanic regions, and the surface heat flow and the granite production, is twice as much than the global average. So this is the first part of the project. The second part was about trying to evaluate the economics. So again, I think some of the industry experts share a bit about the different solutions for extracting heat out of the hot dry rock. We compare two options, which we think might be more suitable for Singapore. One is what we call EGS, which entails fracturing the rock. And the second one is AGS, which is similar to what it was presented just now by Everloop. So we assess, based on the temperature gradients and the thermal conductivity of some of the parameters that we could get, we're trying to assess which could be the production well temperatures on whether we're dealing with the EGS or AGS at different depths. So we were swept from 3 kilometers all the way down to 7. And as you can see, the numbers change quite significantly if you look at EGS versus AGS. But what we're trying to see, what it could be a temperature which is good enough to generate power first, or cooling. In fact, the two case studies that we wanted to assess, that we assessed after this, is electricity generation, and we fixed a generation capacity of around 50 megawatt electric, and the second use case was chill water generation of 300 megawatt thermal by using absorption refrigeration chillers, and that sort of cooling capacity is a sort of cooling capacity that could serve a data center of 100 megawatt size with a POE of 1.4. So I don't want to dwell into some of the assumptions. Of course, there is a variance when it comes to the cost that has to do with the cost of drilling. So as you can see in the chart in the middle, when it comes to the cost of drilling, we had to take a range. What is the current cost? What is the expected cost? And also we took some sort of average cost highlighted by the black solid line, which it takes into account the information that was shared recently by some of the companies in the US, where they reported the cost of roughly 1,100 USD per meter of drilling. So we took these three drilling costs. And in this chart, what you can see comparison. So you can see on the left-hand side of the chart, we compare EGS down to 4 and 5. So the chart shows the LCOE, USD per megawatt hour electric. So on the left-hand side, the two bars show EGS down to 4 and 5 kilometers. The one in the middle shows EGS down to 6 and 7 kilometers, and the one on the right-hand side and the one on the far right-hand side, which is basically giving the Unifor Singapore energy price in the first quarter of 2023, right? So if you look at the numbers, you see that the EGS scores better than AGS when it comes to the LCOE, which is somewhat expected. But if you look at the AGS, it seems to be competitive for what it concerns the current electricity costs and also to some of the alternatives that might entail to bring in and consider hydrogen as a source, as a primary energy source for power production. And some of the assumptions are given in the bottom side of the chart. For what it concerns the levelized cost of cooling, likewise, we see a similar trend. So for what it concerns the EGS, and if you can notice, the EGS now in this case, it does not go down to 5 kilometers, but rather we consider 3 and 4 kilometers because that temperature could be good enough already to generate cooling. So when it concerns the EGS, and then you look at the AGS, and likewise for the AGS, we are considering 5 and 6 kilometers, no longer 6 and 7. You see that the numbers, for AGS seems to be comparable with what is the Singapore chilled water tariff, as reported by Singapore Power And the one that you can see next to it, we also took some reference from the levelized cost of cooling from some of the reports at the arena. But again, the message is that for what it concerns EGS, we get much cheaper LCOC, but AGS, although it requires more drilling, right, to extract the heat, still seems to be competitive. Last two charts. The one is on the global warming potential that we calculated by LCA only for the EGS. So we took into account both cases for the ORC. ORC means electricity generation, and ARC, chill water generation. And probably without looking at the pie chart, if you look at the 2 bullet points at the bottom, you can see that the emission factor for the ORC of electricity generation is way below, right, from what we currently experience for Singapore. And currently, the emission factor in Singapore is around 420 kilogram of CO2 per megawatt hour electric. So the numbers are way lower. And for the ARC, likewise, we can see the emission factors for cooling production, which is quite significantly lower than what we can experience now. And for that cooling part, we take into account the emission factor of the electricity grid and the conventional chiller that might run at the COP of 5 or 5.4. So this final chart is to show that if you compare the numbers from our current study, which are on the right-hand side of the chart, 15.9 kilogram of CO2 per megawatt hour electric, and you compare against other forms of renewables like PV, EGS binary, and also with more conventional solution to generate power, geothermal seems to score pretty low and pretty well, which basically gives us some hope that this could be one of the options for Singapore to have for the future energy mix of Singapore. And I'm done with that. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much for the presentation, Alessandro. I want to just think about the research that you've done and the progress that's been made on it. What's the next step in enabling a reduction in the cost curve for geothermal? Where do we take this research from here?
Yeah, so from our side, just to highlight a bit what is going on now on geothermal in Singapore, currently there is a nationwide geophysical survey that is ongoing in Singapore, because in our case, actually, in a way, we have been somewhat lucky that we identified a site which showed great geothermal potential, but indeed, a mapping of the subsurface condition is needed. And the next step really would be that of trying to understand what is the temperature that we can find at a depth of 4 to 5 kilometers. I mean, at the moment, we can only extrapolate the temperatures, but indeed, the next step will be that of drilling deeper, measure the temperatures, and also to start pumping some fluid and extract some heat to understand how the rock will behave and what is the capacity of the geothermal that we can get.
Given that your research is in the context of Singapore, Natalie actually asks an interesting question, which is, given the urban density of the country, are you finding that there's a future possibility to use geothermal in or near metropolitan areas? Like, how do we do this given the urban density of Singapore?
I think that's a very valid point, and I think the presentations below from Evo, for instance, highlighted some of the options that we might have. Of course, there is some concern for a higher density populated country like Singapore on whether geothermal might induce some seismicity, and we are well aware of all those concerns. We hear news from what is happening in some other projects, but as you can see below, technology is evolving such that the drilling might also go lateral, right? And the heat extraction might happen in certain areas, whereas the production generation plant could be elsewhere. So I think it's possible to dislocate and dispatch geothermal in Singapore without affecting too much the built environment, while tapping from the infrastructure which mainly sits underneath, because the footprint for geothermal is not that large when it comes to the actual footprint. The bulk of the infrastructure is underground, and that is where there is room to expand and improve and generate more capacity.
Can we expand on the research and its impact on the region? I'm thinking if we can have success in geothermal in Singapore, how do we come together and think through Southeast Asia and a contextual aspect of making sure there's a regional benefit to this technology here. Can the region help both ways in terms of, for example, Malaysia or Indonesia also leveraging the technology and the research you're doing?
Yeah, so definitely there is room. In fact, we are sitting in a region. So if you look at Southeast Asia, actually, they have quite a large share of the worldwide geothermal installed capacity for the obvious reason to be in a volcanic region. I think more than 35% of the worldwide geothermal installed capacity sits in this region for both electricity and thermal. But of course, there are room to sort of expand the research that we've done here in Singapore to Malaysia, because in Malaysia, actually, if you just look across, there is also other hot springs, which indicate, some fluids from underground that is geothermal potential. And potentially, this could extend all the way to Thailand. The reason of that, again, I'm not a geologist, but this goes back to hundreds of thousands of years back when the Pan Island Peninsula was formed. And that is where some of these fractures were also present, and that might explain for some of the geothermal activity that we are seeing. So when it comes to the region, definitely there is room to leverage on what we have done here, expanding across the borders. And that's, in fact, what we are trying to do with some of the neighboring universities.
My final question, I want to build on something we weren't able to tackle in Paul's conversation, but it's actually been thematic throughout some of the technologies today. I'm going to put your professor hat on. So leave the research aside. It was a great presentation. How do we think about the human capital aspect of this? How do we bring up another generation, in the academic setting that want to be inspired, want to be engaged in the technology, whether it's geothermal, nuclear fusion? What are you seeing firsthand with that professor hat on?
Just to give you some example, when we started the project in 2021, it was almost impossible to identify anybody in Singapore that wanted to work in this project, because nobody knew about geothermal. Nobody thought, hey, why should we start working on geothermal? Now we built a bit of traction and momentum. So we see the interest is there. Some of the news that we see from overseas also seem very encouraging. And when it comes to new technologies and the human capital, that's a very valid question. In fact, retention of human capital, knowledge retention, right? And actually to also foster the next generation of innovators and researchers is something that we ask ourselves very often. And of course, we see a big way that has to do with all the AI and machine learning. And I guess the question would be, how can we sort of combine a little bit of these new trends with what the world needs in terms of energy transition, try to bring them together and offer it to our next generation engineers or students. So that is the sort of merging that we need to be able to do. It's not obvious, to be honest, but that's where we are working on at the moment.
Well, we're going to leave the conversation on that note. Really appreciate the work you're putting into this and the inspiration you're bringing to a new generation of technologists and energy leaders. Join me in thanking Alessandro for his presentation. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, we made up some time. We are closing at 5. I want to take a moment and thank SIEW, thank the Energy Market Authority and Aramco for making sure that technology is on full display here during SIEW. I think this is a brilliant time. It's a brilliant time to talk about the future of technology and the optimism that we can bring to the energy transition. So thank you for joining us. I know it was a long haul for a couple hours here, but I think it was worth it, and look forward to seeing you next year.
Thank you, Landon. And with that, we've come to the end of the SIEW TechTable. Please join us at the SIEW Connects, which is located at Wakuda at the MBS Hotel, Lift Lobby, Tower 2. The SIEW Think Tank Roundtable sessions will begin tomorrow at 9:30. Have a good evening ahead, and thank you.